We'll get started. Welcome to the public hearing for the inquiry into budget estimates 2021-2022, counter-terrorism and corrections. Before I commence, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging of the Eora Nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginals present. I welcome Minister Anthony Roberts and accompanying officials to this hearing. Today the committee will examine the proposed expenditure for the portfolios of counter-terrorism and corrections. Before we commence, I would like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's proceedings are being broadcast live from Parliament's website, and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website, once it becomes available. In accordance with broadcasting guidelines, the media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about the committee's proceedings. All witnesses in budget estimates have a right to procedural fairness according to the procedural fairness resolution adopted by the House in 2018. There may be some questions that a witness could only answer if they had time or more time and certain documents to hand. In these circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take a question on notice and provide an answer within 21 days. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. Minister, I remind you and the officers accompanying you that you are free to pass notes and refer directly to your advisors seated at the table behind you. In terms of audibility of the hearing today, we have witnesses in person and via video conference. Can I ask the committee members to clearly identify who questions are directed to, and could I ask everyone appearing remotely to please state their name when they begin speaking? Could everyone please mute their microphones when they are not speaking? And finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing? All witnesses will be sworn prior to giving evidence. Minister Roberts, I remind you that you do not need to be sworn, as you have already sworn an oath to your office as a Member of Parliament. I also would like to remind the following witnesses that you do not need to be sworn, as you have been sworn at an earlier budget estimates hearing before this committee. Ms Catherine D'Alia, Acting Secretary, Department of Communities and Justice. And for all other witnesses, I ask that you each in turn state your full name, position, title and agency, swear either an oath or an affirmation. Words of both the oath and the affirmation are on the cards on the table in front of you. Please begin with my first witness to my left, Mr Corcoran.
Yes, Yes, Kevin Corcoran, Acting Commissioner, Corrective Services, New South Wales. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Ms Van der Zandt. Ms Van der Zandt.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, my name is Pia Van der Zandt. I'm the Acting Executive Director of the Strategy and Policy Branch in Department of Communities and Justice. I'm going to give an affirmation. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Ms Crawford.
My name is Sandra Crawford. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Community Corrections, Corrective Services, New South Wales, Department of Communities and Justice. And I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Grant.
I'm Luke Grant, Deputy Commissioner for Corrective Services, New South Wales. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And Mr Frierson? You're on mute, Mr Frierson. You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right, thank you. David Frierson, Chairperson of the State Parole Authority. I'll take an oath. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. Today's hearing will be conducted from 9:30am till 12:45pm with the Minister and departmental witnesses, with questions from the opposition and crossbench members only. If required, an additional 15 minutes is allocated at the end of the session for government questions.
Will not be required.
As there is no provision for any witness to make an opening statement before the committee commences questioning, we'll begin with questions from the opposition.
Good morning,
Very
everybody.
good morning.
Thank you for joining us today. I've said this a number of times on the record over the last couple of months, but I'll say it again as we start today. Can I thank you for the work that you do? It's really important. It's valued by all of us. We appreciate particularly the staff who work in facilities. Acting Commissioner, if you could pass on our thanks for the work that they do, keeping us safe. I know it's very dangerous and very considered work, and same to particularly the people who work in Justice Health, supporting the people who are in these facilities. So genuinely thank you. It won't surprise you that I'm going to start off by asking about the COVID situation that's occurred over the last couple of months. And Minister, I'm happy to go through you to whoever you think is the appropriate person to answer these questions. But can I ask, where are we at the moment? How many cases were there to date, or have there been to date?
I'll pass to the commissioner, the acting commissioner. The entire COVID cases as of the 1st of November, we had 553 inmates. 327 of those inmates tested positive while under strict mandatory quarantine on entry to custody. 228 inmates have tested positive outside of quarantine, and some 75 corrective services staff. But I'm pleased to inform this committee that we do have good news. It has been a very good story for corrections. So I might ask the Assistant Commissioner to outline where we are at today and how we've got there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Minister. Yeah, we've currently got 15 active cases and in the system, and all of those are people who've come in from the community with the infection. So at the moment there are 0 cases left of any outbreaks that may have occurred. So we've completely eliminated transmission inside the system. So the command post has been doing a magnificent job of containing this and bringing that back to 0. And that command post is comprised of all sorts of people from corrections, from the union, from Justice Health. And we've been working not only with that command post, but working right across the state with union representatives, involving them in decision making about how we progress the response to COVID as a result of this Delta variant that's made it a lot more difficult for us to cope with.
So I'm pleased to hear that at this point it seems to be under control, but
553
is still a very high and unacceptable number in what are the most controlled facilities in the state of New South Wales. I'm pleased that it's under control, and hopefully it can stay that way. But how did we get to 553 in the first place, given the nature of the system?
So look,
Yes,
and I want to make it quite clear that for 18 months, corrective services effectively managed COVID-19 risks and put strategies in place to mitigate transmission of the virus between inmate and staff within our prisons. So throughout 2020, if I can just put it into some context here, while there are over 4,700 cases of COVID recorded in our state, there were no transmissions within the correctional centre. In fact, it took over 18 months and over 18,200 cases to be recorded in New South Wales before we had the first case of transmission in the correctional system itself. And I'd like to echo your opening statement, and that is it is due to the fantastic work that correctional officers and staff right across the board did in managing this. This was very new. No one had ever planned about having sort of these COVID-19 outbreaks, let alone the Delta variants. So in setting up early the command post, which had management, staff, unions, as well as Justice Health, staff there, we're able to put in protocols under health advice to ensure that we managed and were able to secure those prisons for such a long time. Because the issue we have is that unlike schools or indeed Parliament, we can't close our correctional system down for a deep cleanse and then open it up again 2 days later. So there was extensive planning put into place from the very start. And again, that level of cooperation, and there has been a lot of learnings that have come from this. There are things that, if this occurs again, we will do better. But I've got to say there's been some fantastic learnings, and I'll certainly ask the Assistant Commissioner, who was there from the very start, to outline some of those key learnings and where we had the first sort of transmission.
Well, but so before you do that, because I do have some questions about that. So I get that we've been all living with COVID for 18, 19 months, whatever it's been now, and you did do well last year. There wasn't an outbreak last year, but this year, from July or August, 553 cases, and you're right, like there were issues in schools and all the rest of it, but your facilities are completely, totally controlled by you, so it's not the same. I'm pleased to hear there are learnings now, but why weren't processes set up to stop this from getting in the first place? And how was it not controlled when the first case did get in?
So, look, can I just point out before I hand to the Assistant Commissioner, there were processes put in place from the very beginning that worked successfully with COVID-19. The Delta strain was something entirely different, and as I said, with over 18,000 cases in the community, we were the last standing post, probably, in the Commonwealth to actually fall to COVID-19. And that is because of the protocols and the practices and procedures that we had in place. And certainly we were able to be quite nimble when it came to addressing the new Delta variant in actually how we managed inmates coming in on remand, because the population, can I say that we deal with, that cohort of people that we deal with in our prison facility, aren't people that usually listen to health advice or health directions, if I'm to say. They're people that quite often, well, obviously live outside of the law, but certainly, Assistant Commissioner, if you could just run through from where we started and then how we changed the procedures and practices to when we had our first outbreak.
Well, so again, I'll interrupt because we did cover some of this in the public accountability hearing, and I don't intend to revisit old ground except for some follow-up from that. But again, I accept that this is an unusual system to manage, but once people are in the system, they are completely controlled. Every movement, every interaction or not, everything that they do is completely controlled by you. So how can it be that 553 cases, they're not people who are in and out of the system, the staff are, which was also a concern, and quite a number of staff were sick, and hopefully all of them are better now, because I know some of them were very sick. But you haven't answered the question about how that happened. And just as a second part to that, in the Public Accountability Committee hearing, we did touch on the fact that you were going to look into how the original case got into Parklea. Yes. Where are we at with that? Okay,
well, I can answer that, but can I also just, I hate to nitpick on these things, but when we talk about 553 inmates, 327 of those were basically new inmates coming in.
It's the 228, isn't it? That's the one to focus on.
Yeah, that's 200.
Right. The transmission
but
inside
I think,
the system.
But I think it's important.
I'm going to focus on the 553 actually, because I understand some of them were new and some of the spread was in the system. I get the point of the two numbers, but all of them were completely and totally in your care.
In our custody. That's right. So just with respect to, I take it where you're coming from is the COVID-19 Parklea, the original outbreak into Parklea. So I've directed the Acting Secretary to arrange for an independent inquiry into the management of COVID-19 at Parklea Correctional Centre. I mean, it concerns me it got in. It concerns us all. We want to know why it happened. So Mr. Peter Dean, APM, has been appointed as that investigator for this inquiry. He is a highly decorated retired Assistant Commissioner of Police and Crime Commission and a consultant for law enforcement, government and related industries. The terms of reference for the inquiry are to 1, investigate the application of COVID-related policies and procedures at Parklea Correctional Centre prior to and at the time of the first positive COVID case outside of quarantine. Secondly, to investigate the circumstances outlined in 2 recent legal cases related to the management of COVID risk. Thirdly, to consider whether appropriate COVID risk management processes and health advice, as applicable at the time, were followed in the 2 legal cases. Fourthly, consider the respective roles and responsibility of Corrective Services New South Wales, the Justice and Forensic Mental Health Network, the Parklea Correctional Centre Operator, MTC Broad Spectrum and Health Provider St Vincent's Hospital Network in relation to those 2 legal cases. And finally, to make any appropriate recommendations for improvements. That final report is expected in mid-December, and I'll be releasing that.
Great, so I look forward to that. Can I just
On the 24th of December.
Oh, and also, just to, on top of that though, we've also got the the University of New South Wales Kirby Institute has also been engaged to conduct an independent review of how the outbreak spread, and the findings from this review will be used to identify risks and improve COVID-19 protocols and procedures.
Thanks. What was the original date that COVID got into Parklea?
Assistant Commissioner?
Yes, the date that it got out of quarantine, the command centre were advised on the 23rd of August.
So you were notified on the 23rd of August?
Yes.
And so there was no other information about it before then that you were aware of?
None that we're aware of.
What about you, Minister?
Not that I was aware of.
So, I mean, I started hearing about it a few days before that, but I couldn't confirm it until, in fact, the 28th, which is almost a week after you were told. So the 28th was when I did get confirmation about it, and up until then it was not made public. So why was it covered up or hidden during the course of that week?
Well, can I just put, I don't think it was covered up or hidden. If it was, this investigation will find out. I mean, I want to know, as I said before, I want to know how it got in. You know, we were successful up to that stage, you know, within the broader prison network, and that's what the investigation will look at. And again, I'll make that investigation public as soon as I get that. And did you want to?
No, I mean, look, as soon as we found out there was an outbreak, we acted immediately. We closed Parklea down. We identified where everybody over the previous couple of weeks had been sent around the system. And I think I talked about this in the Public Accountability Committee, but there was an immediate shutdown of the system, the entire system. So, you know, there was no covering anything up. It was, you know, as soon as we understood that there was a problem, we acted immediately.
But was that after the 28th when I got confirmation of it, or on the 23rd when you got confirmation of it? From the 23rd, because it's almost a week.
I can't recall the exact date. You know, like it was a Sunday night.
Happy to take it on notice.
Yeah, but I can take it on notice, yeah.
Sure. As part of this inquiry, and in fact, if you could answer this as well, I accept that you were told on the 23rd.
Yeah.
But Health New South Wales Health had put out some information as part of their COVID daily information, saying that the first case that they were officially aware of in Parklea was on the 18th. So if New South Wales Health said the first case was on the 18th, why weren't you told until the 23rd? And how come I couldn't get confirmation until the 28th, which is when it became public?
I think that would be a matter for certainly Justice Health and New South Wales Health to answer, but certainly that will be covered in this investigation. We want the full timeline. I mean, we want to know, you know, when things occurred and essentially also how they occurred and what learnings we can take from that.
Minister, might I assist this process? I think there's a bit of confusion around the date. Would Grant speaking?
I'm not confused, but I'm happy to hear from you.
Yeah, so I think the members are a little bit confused about the cases. So Parklea had some cases of fresh receptions earlier than the date of the 23rd. So the first case that you would have been aware of that New South Wales Health may have reported was a case of a person who had COVID when they came to prison whose COVID status was detected during the quarantine phase. The 23rd was the date of the first person who had finished their quarantine phase. In fact, they were still in the quarantine unit and hadn't moved out of that unit. So we received advice on the 23rd that there was a person who was positive. That was a person who was resident in the quarantine area who had not moved out of that area. The 27th was the date when we first became aware that it may have actually spread outside of the quarantine area into the mainstream population, when we got advice that only 2 prisoners were outside of that area. So in relation to the first one, because it was unusual, it was the first case we had of someone who hadn't been in quarantine. The person was retested again. That process always occurs to assure ourselves that that's the case. But the significant incident really was the 27th that confirmed that we had a problem, because the cases now are outside of the quarantine space within the correctional centre. So all of those dates are correct dates, but they relate to 3 different things. The first one being a patient, a prisoner, who became positive whilst they're in the quarantine phase. The second one was a prisoner who was resident of the quarantine area, but was positive outside of the 14-day quarantine period. And the third one was 2 prisoners who were outside of the quarantine zone. So quarantine isn't just a process, it's actually a place in a correctional centre. So the first 2 cases that we had outside of that were the 2 cases on the 27th.
Thanks. So I'll come back to some questions a little later about those processes, but in the short period of time I have left, I want to just very delicately ask a question as sensitively as I can about what I've been advised has been a death of a person who was in Parklea, and I'm told contracted COVID in Parklea and has recently died as a result. Can you give me some information, or give us some information about that?
And in fact was unvaccinated.
Yeah, that is... Thank you.
Unvaccinated.
Again, I'd like to extend our sincere condolences to the family, and I appreciate it will be a difficult time for them, and we'll answer this, as you say, as sensitively as possible. I've asked the Acting Secretary to include the circumstances of the person's COVID-19 infection in the terms of reference for the independent inquiry into the management of COVID at Parklea. But at this stage, no advice has been received regarding whether there will be an investigation of the person's death by the New South Wales coroner. And I think until such advice is received, it's probably appropriate that we don't comment any further.
So again, I want to be sensitive about this because, my condolences to the family also. I mean that sincerely, but I mean, it's not good enough to send this off to an inquiry. As a result of what's happened over the last couple of months, a person has very recently died. You've got to give us some more information about the circumstances around that. So I understand he was moved to hospital as a result. So can you give us some more information around the circumstances?
Yes, so this person had a number of underlying comorbidities and became quite ill with COVID. And with all infections that result in illness at a higher level, we transfer them to hospital. So they're looked after in the public health system. And he was placed on bail because, as I understand, he was intubated as well. So there was really no need for 2 officers to be sitting there 24 hours a day guarding him. So we put this. We applied for, asked the court to consider whether he would be placed on bail, and that bail was granted.
How long had he been in the facility? I don't need personal details.
Yeah. How long had he been where? Sorry, I didn't catch the question.
How long had he been in Parklea or in prison?
Okay. Just.
I can answer that question if you
thanks.
Yep, I'll ask the Deputy Commissioner.
So he was received in custody on the 26th of June 2021. In response to the point that's been raised about vaccination, he actually was offered a vaccination which he declined on the 6th of September. So he was in a cell with another person. That person was offered a vaccination on that date and had the vaccination and was double vaccinated. This person sadly did not take up the opportunity of the vaccination on the date that he was offered it.
Why wasn't he offered vaccination before the 6th of September?
Assistant Commissioner?
I would have to find out whether he was indeed offered. I just know about that particular date because that was the date his cellmate did, so I have to take that on notice.
Well, I mean, the vaccination program through the course of this year has been woefully slow, but I'll come to that later. So,
Can I just
yes.
I just need to pick you up on that. The vaccination program within the prisons has been quite effective. But if you want to, I just want to place that on the record. But if you want to come back to it or deal with it now.
I think I'm about to be out of time, but I don't think it was particularly effective for this person.
Well, they refused the vaccination.
On the 6th of September.
Assistant Commissioner?
That's right. So I'll take on notice, but it was offered before. I've only got information about that date. Should have been vaccinated on that date. I didn't have an issue on that matter.
He came in.
Any questions, Robert?
Not 20 over June.
Right, thanks, Chair. Minister, nice to see you. Acting
Great to see
Commissioner. Acting Commissioner, do you know how long the acting commissionership role will last? Has anyone given you advice about the recruitment process?
If you can just direct the questions through me, if you don't mind, Assistant Commissioner.
Oh, yeah, thank you,
Well-
Minister. Yes, interviews have been conducted, and the process is continuing at the moment. So I'd imagine that a decision will be announced in the next few weeks.
If I can ask the acting cluster head, acting secretary, to outline that process.
And then you might ask the acting deputy commissioner, who may ask the acting assistant commissioner, and then we'll get an answer. Sorry, acting secretary.
Thank you, Minister.
yeah.
So, as the acting commissioner mentioned, the interviews have been completed. Reference checks are underway, and once the reference checks are done, then we will be able to make the recommendation with respect to the permanent commissioner.
All right. Minister, do you have a time frame?
No, it's independent. I'm leaving it to the department.
Yeah, so the department will make a recommendation, and then you make the decision, Minister, is that right?
Yes.
Yep.
Or Cabinet will.
So you'll take a recommendation to Cabinet?
Correct.
Yep. And you don't have a time frame for that?
No.
If we could return to the tragic death of the man from Parklea who was incarcerated in Parklea. I don't know if this is best through you, Minister, to the acting commissioner or to the assistant commissioner, whoever has the most current information. When did the man actually pass away? What was the date of death?
Let me just confer with my acting commissioner and deputy commissioner. Deputy Commissioner, do you want to unpack this?
We were advised of his death on the 31st of October. Noting that he wasn't in our custody at the time he'd been granted bail, so we weren't managing him or had no direct information, but I think we heard about it pretty soon after the event occurred.
All right. And entered custody on remand, is my understanding, on the 26th of June. Is that right, Deputy Commissioner?
Deputy Commissioner?
Was the man a First Nations man?
No, it wasn't.
Do you know, is there any explanation for why the first record of, I'll withdraw that. Do you have records that this man refused the vaccination on the 6th of September? Or are you speculating on the basis that his cellmate?
Deputy Commissioner.
Deputy Commissioner?
At any stage, if you think this is going to potentially hinder a coronial investigation, feel free to outline that. But are you able to answer that in view that this may be an investigation that will be taken up by the coroner?
So in terms, I can answer that, I think, Minister. I don't have documentary evidence in relation to the timing of the event. However, I've confirmed with health, with the providers of health, that he was offered a vaccine on that day. I understand that there may have been some evidence by way of video footage that showed the team who went offering vaccinations to the cell, attending his cell. His cellmate accepted the vaccination. He didn't accept the vaccination. I've got no record. I don't know what transpired on the occasion.
Through you, Minister, to the acting commissioner, if a person in custody refuses vaccination, I assume that there's then, after that, some kind of public health response. You send in some kind of experts or teams to go and speak with an inmate and get over the barrier of that's preventing vaccination. I'm assuming that's in place, Acting Commissioner?
Yes, thanks, Minister. Look, all the vaccinations are administered by health officials in any case. If somebody refuses a vaccine, they take them through that process of, giving them information. People were a little hesitant around that time, I think with the AstraZeneca, and this was something I highlighted, I think, in the Public Accountability Committee. But since we've had Pfizer in the system, the uptake has been quite considerable in terms of the level of first dose and second dose vaccinations.
But my question is there a process in place to overcome that barrier, to send people in, to actually talk with any inmate who's refused a vaccination, to talk them through the issues and persuade them about the science and the medical benefits of vaccination? And I'm not getting any comfort from your answers so far,
Most probably
Acting
because
Commissioner.
it's a Justice Health responsibility. So that question should be directed to the Minister for Health.
Well, the Acting Commissioner must know what's going on in his prisons in terms of dealing with COVID. It's a fundamental issue about the management of prisons. So I'm going to press the question to you, Acting Commissioner. Is there any process in place that you're aware of to do that?
I can speak, not for St Vincent's Health, because I've had much more, engagement with Justice Health, but certainly with Justice Health, they have been engaging in processes with inmates around the state, and I think evidence of their success is the levels. But I obviously they're Justice Health statistics, and you would need to go to health to get them. But I do know what they are, and they are considerable in terms of the levels that we've achieved over the last few months.
Well, I'm going to ask you two further questions about this tragic death. First of all, when, if at all, apart from the 6th of September, was this man offered vaccination? And at any point after the initial refusal, were there efforts made, and if so, what were they, to overcome the vaccine hesitancy to try and protect this man's health and welfare?
Well, we'll take those on notice.
Deputy Commissioner, what vaccine was offered on the 6th of September?
I'll go to Deputy Commissioner.
Sorry, I'll have to take that on notice. I don't have the information, but I'll just be guessing if I told you.
The Health Minister has said that New South Wales is currently awash with vaccines and has asked for the federal government not to send any more in for a bit. Is that the same situation in corrections?
I'll ask the Deputy Commissioner. I don't think at any stage were we wanting the vaccines, were we?
I mean, initially we didn't have Pfizer. However, my understanding is there's ample vaccines for anyone who wants to be vaccinated at the moment. There's no shortage of vaccines.
What proportion of the prison population has had one dose of vaccine, or at least one dose, and what proportion is doubly vaccinated? And if you can break it down at all between male and female, and also if you've got Indigenous and non-Indigenous rates.
We probably could break it down for you.
Yeah, but do you have the overall number at the moment, Minister? You must have come with that.
When you say proportion, do you want a percentage or numbers?
Well, I'm happy to work out the percentage
percentage is
myself
sort
if
of a
you give me
number.
the numbers of people in custody, numbers who are vaccinated. I'll do the maths and do the percentage, or you can give me both.
Okay, well, we'll try to give you both if we can. Deputy Commissioner?
Just hold on for a moment. I was trying to get the latest figures. Unless the Commissioner has them in front of this pack up again somewhere.
It should be on the first page, I imagine. Commission. That'd be my guess.
Oh, in fact, I think you're right.
Oh, here it is.
Here we go. Something I prepared earlier. So 82.5% of inmates have received their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. 81%. That's the population. 81.7% of the Indigenous population. And then 67% of the prison population is fully vaccinated, with 63.3% of the Indigenous population fully vaccinated.
That double vaccination rate is still substantially lower, almost 15%. Well, in terms of First Nations inmates, almost 15% lower, 16% lower than the general population.
In New South Wales, it's better
in New
than
South
Western
Wales,
Australia
in New
and
South Wales, and
Queensland.
given we're in New South Wales, but I'll take the clarification, and still about 12% lower for the general population. My colleague, Ms Moriarty, put to you that this is a population that's entirely in your control. So how is it that the vaccination rates in prison are lower than that in the general population?
I'll pass to the Deputy Commissioner. I mean, really, this is a question for Justice Health, who monitor this and have been responsible for the rollout of this. But if we can potentially, trying to be helpful, as we always are, can we add anything there, or do we, Deputy Commissioner?
You've muted yourself, sorry, Deputy Commissioner.
I can speculate on some of the reasons. One of them is that there is a high level of mobility of people moving into and out of prison. So a significant percentage of people who are in custody on remand are often there for a very short period of time. So they might have one dose, but they won't have the second dose, or they mightn't even be there long enough actually to have a second dose, because there are people, a significant number of people would be in custody for less than 2 weeks. The second thing is there is some reluctance, as the Commissioner mentioned, from people refusing to be vaccinated. It's not, it may have something to do with the characteristics of people in custody, their scepticism about vaccines. I know that it's not a unique experience in New South Wales. Some of the other jurisdictions have had slightly larger numbers of people, but I was conferring with colleagues only in this last week in the Correctional Service of Canada, that 2/3 of their prisoners were refusing the offer of being vaccinated. So compared to some populations, I think we're doing okay. I think the high level of mobility is possibly one account for it, and the second one is that people just are not taking up the option, even though the option is available.
Yeah. Thanks, Deputy Commissioner. So I go back to the question I asked earlier. What are the systems in place to go back to an inmate who's refused vaccine to bring in, if they're First Nations, a culturally appropriate medical service, and hopefully an Aboriginal controlled medical service to talk them through the issues? If they're not Indigenous, well, then the relevant experts to come in and talk them through the vaccine hesitancy. What's in place?
Well, I think if I can respond to that question by saying that, I think you hit it in one, Mr. Shoebridge, when you spoke about medical procedures, right? Medical procedures are run by Justice Health. They run the programs, and any program around be it vaccination or follow-up processes or programs to get people vaccinated is a question best answered by, because they control it and they run it, and that's Justice Health.
So you're washing your hands of this issue, Minister. You just say it's all Justice Health. You don't think that it's a joint responsibility between Corrections and Justice Health to make sure that the inmates in your care and custody, and I'd suggest both, not just custody, but care and custody, are protected from COVID? You don't think it's a joint responsibility?
It is run by Justice Health, and any questions around the processes and programs should be directed to Justice Health.
Do you think it's a joint responsibility, Minister?
I can just answer the question.
Yeah,
do you think it's a joint responsibility?
What I'm saying is that this is best answered by Justice Health. They run the medical programs and procedures. We facilitate, of course, access those individuals to our centres, but it is run by.
Well, I'm going to ask you now about. I've asked you about, are these services provided? So now I'm going to ask you, what of those services do you facilitate Justice Health providing?
So we facilitate access to the centres.
Yeah, but in terms of overcoming vaccine hesitancy, what services from Justice Health do you facilitate providing to inmates who have refused a vaccine?
Can I? Yes.
Look, the issue here is that we are facilitating access for whatever Justice Health requires, or whatever the other private providers require, to the inmates. And if you're talking about a joint responsibility, that's our responsibility. The other responsibility of getting people across the line for vaccines really falls to the health providers.
Assistant Commissioner, or Acting Commissioner, through you, Minister.
Thank
Acting
you.
Commissioner, do you have the vaccination rates on a facility by facility basis?
Well, I don't think we've got them here in front of us. What we've just got is the broad figures, but we'd have to take that on notice.
Would you be able to identify them this morning, if possible? Could you ask the staff behind you to do it? I mean, one of the reasons I ask this is particularly to look at how Parklea has responded, given the concerns about Parklea.
Sure.
Could you endeavour to find those numbers?
I think the Deputy Commissioner probably...
Yeah, I'll seek advice from the Deputy Commissioner. Deputy Commissioner, can we have the vaccination levels by jail, by centre?
Thank you for that proposal. I don't have that in front of me. If I might add, Minister, just to clarify one point that was raised by Mr. Shoebridge, we have engaged with the inmate development committees and the correctional centres about the things that need to be done to keep them safe, including encouraging them to engage in the vaccination process and to use PPE and to maintain hygiene. We've also issued fact sheets to prisoners through the buy-up process, so that prisoners in custody have got information. Also, when people arrive in custody, we have a health tips program, which is something which was all about safe practices in custody for promoting health that every person who comes in custody receives. And only yesterday I was speaking to a manager responsible for this at the major reception centre, who told me that his staff were going cell by cell to people on arrival. These are out the corrective services team, the service and programs officers, to talk to people about what they need to do to stay safe, including taking vaccines and maintaining appropriate hygiene, using PPE in the appropriate places. So it's not a lack of effort on our behalf. I think what the Minister was pointing to, though, was that the vaccination process itself is Justice Health's responsibility. They've got a fantastic population health team that we have a lot to do with, and they strategise around tactics for getting people to take up the vaccine. We just can't speak on their behalf, and I just encourage you to ask that question of the Minister, because they're the people who are managing that activity.
Minister, did you get a report about the very recent, and I think it was around about 19-20 October, decision by New South Wales District Court Deputy Chief Judge Colfax, who had evidence, uncontested by the Crown, about an inmate who had said that they had been confined alongside a COVID-19 cellmate in Parklea for 4 weeks and was told would only be sent back to the general prison population after they had caught COVID-19 and recovered from it. Have you had a report about that?
I'll refer to the Deputy Commissioner.
I presume that's one of the cases the Minister was referring to before. Is that correct? There were 2 cases that the Minister's referred to, independent external investigation.
I can't, I'm not inside the Minister's mind, so I can't tell you that. But I'm asking you about the, which is probably a good thing. I was asking you about the decision by Deputy Chief Judge Colfax, and I think it was around about the 19th or 20th of October, and the evidence that the court accepted, because it was not challenged, about an inmate being held alongside a COVID-19 positive cellmate for 4 weeks and told would not be released until they had caught and covered into the general population, until they had caught and recovered from COVID-19.
Right, okay, so this is, the Deputy Commissioner is correct. This is one of those issues that I raised earlier that will be investigated. And once that investigation is concluded, you'll be able to read about that because I'll be releasing that.
But you see, this wasn't months ago. This is like 2 weeks ago. Is that the current practice in Parklea? Surely you're not going to wait until a report's handed down in December before you act when you have evidence like that.
Well, that's why we have an independent investigator, a highly decorated former police officer that will get to
going to report in December, and it's happening now in Parklea. You're not telling me that's your answer. Just roll out the next 2 months of this practice and we'll get a report in December and do something. That's really not your answer, is it, Minister?
Assistant Commissioner.
Yes, thanks, Minister. There are no positive cases in Parklea. The MRRC, Metropolitan Remand and Reception Centre, is the only place we hold fresh custodies in the metropolitan area. So any fresh custody that comes in that has got, is positive when they come in is held in MRRC, it's cleared, and we've got another strategy in place where we've got staging areas. So there's, in essence, about a 3-week quarantine period before anybody would go to Parklea. So we are ensuring that Parklea is COVID-free.
Have you, Assistant Commissioner, sought a response from Parklea, given the
Through me.
uncontested evidence through you, Minister?
Yeah.
Have you sought a report from Parklea, given the uncontested evidence about that extraordinarily, I'd say, dangerous practice that they appear to have in place?
Well, so we've got the review occurring by the Kirby Institute. We have an independent investigation, and again, once those, the Kirby Institute as a body and the independent investigator finalises their reviews, they'll be made public, and we'll be able to answer that. In fact, I'm happy to drop the reports straight up to your office or email them.
Surely someone just picked up the phone or sent an email or sent someone round to Parklea and said, "What the bloody hell is going on? Tell me what's happening." Hasn't that happened?
As I said, this is a matter of, for investigation and review, unless the
well,
Assistant
you know,
Commissioner wants to add any more.
Yeah, thanks, Minister. I mean, we've had other claims that these sort of things have been going on. And if I might just hand over to the Deputy Commissioner to talk about one particular claim we've had in court recently, and the statistics that were, refuted the claims.
But
that
I'm
were
not
made in
asking
court.
about that. I'm asking
So-
about this
Well,
one,
let him
which was
finish,
uncontested.
Yeah, so if the Deputy Commissioner could just talk about that particular case, which might shed some light on to the fact that, not everybody is being honest.
So
about
because
what
somebody
happened
else
in
lied,
prison.
you're saying this inmate lied?
We're not saying that.
On
We're
evidence that was
actually-
contested.
We're investigating
That's
that
the level of
through
rigour
Well,
of the
I'll take the point
investigation.
of, I'll take the point of order at this stage.
Fairly taken.
Mr.
Point of order.
Shoebridge is constantly interrupting the witnesses as they're giving their answers. The witnesses are entitled to give evidence without the heckling that Mr. Shoebridge is undertaking.
Just to the point of order, I asked a question about case X, and the answer is I'm going to give you a totally unrelated set of material about case Y, the kind of evidence that wouldn't be accepted in a medieval witchcraft court. And it's not of assistance and is not responding to my question.
Well,
He hasn't
And I'm
finished the
quite
answer
right
either.
to take objection to it.
The answer to your question is it's subject to an independent investigation.
I'll uphold the point of order and just remind everybody that this is a medieval witchcraft examination of the Minister.
Yeah,
The
that's
Star
what I signed
Chamber.
up for.
You asked for it.
Yeah, that's right.
We've had a...
Well, we are talking New South Wales Corrective Services, so we're kind of close to that. So.
Oh, really?
shame, David.
Things were going along so
Cutting into our
nicely.
time.
Yeah,
Come on, you
it's my
couldn't.
time now.
Sorry.
Come on, let's go.
You're up.
I don't think New South Wales Corrections is quite that bad.
Well, let's see about that after
We've
this
lost-
series.
Oh,
of lectures.
okay, all right. Sorry, we'll see.
I just want to follow up.
Not
on,
under this
in
minister
fact, what
anyway.
My colleague, Mr. Shoebridge, was
Maybe under
just
Minister
asking
Elliott
about
it
one
would
of the
be.
quotes from
That's
the
acceptable.
judge in that particular case. He actually said that it's even more concerning because it doesn't seem to be an isolated case involving Parklea Correctional Centre. This is in relation to this specific claim that's been made by this inmate. So I understand you're sending this off to an investigation, but I'd still like some answers now, not just about this particular person, but this judge is also saying that it doesn't seem to be an isolated incident. Is it an isolated incident?
It's Assistant Commissioner, keeping in mind that there is an independent investigation occurring at the moment, is there anything you can add at this stage that will not in any way have a detrimental impact on that independence of that investigation?
I can just add for the information of the committee that prior to the Delta variant, we were quarantining people in cohorts. So they would come in groups of, say, 6 or 7 that came in that day, and we would exercise them together. They would get access to, various things such as recreation, phones, etc. Once we understood how infectious the Delta variant was, we had to change our practices, and certainly in MRRC, we made sure that people, unless there was some particular reason that they should be doubled up, were in single cell accommodation. Once I think we became aware of certain practices, as you talk about in Parklea, we made the command post or took immediate action to deal with some of the things that were going on there. But I just don't want to comment. I mean, we've got that independent investigation going on, and you will have access to that, once it's finalised.
Look, I again acknowledge you've announced your investigation today, but this is a case that I think was heard, I'm happy to be corrected on the date, but the 20th of October or thereabouts. This judge has made these comments on or about that date. So this is within the last couple of weeks. This is not since you've had these new practices in place. I understand you're going to investigate this particular incident, but how can we be sure that it's not happening with other people?
I can assure you that.
Commissioner? Yeah.
I can assure you that the practices we've got in place at Silverwater Women's and the Metropolitan Romana Reception Centre are best practice in terms of making sure that people do not, transmit to other people if they are infected.
Excuse me, Minister, if I might add to that response as well, just to reassure people that following that incident, of not that incident you're talking about, but when there was concern about the outbreak of COVID within Buckley, a forum was established that met every day, or I'd say at least a month. So this isn't something we've waited for an investigation to try and understand best practice in infection management. The forum was initiated by Kerry Chant's population public health team, and it included the Agency for Clinical Excellence. It included the St Vincent's, not just the local St Vincent's team, but the best infectious diseases specialists in Sydney who work at St Vincent's Hospital. They met on a daily basis to actually try and understand what was happening in there and put in place practices to prevent further transmission. So we haven't waited for an investigation to look at practices that might need to be improved in the centre and to try to bring that under control. And it was a pretty dramatic improvement in the outcome. We went from having 100 and something cases down to 0 without moving the patients out of that facility. They managed them within the facility with additional resources from St Vincent's, but with very strong oversight from the public health team who've been looking at the practices, including bringing in, as I mentioned, experts from the Agency for Clinical Excellence to look at infection control practices and everything they can look at to try to mitigate the risks further in that centre. So we haven't sat by doing nothing about it. I attended a lot of those meetings that I set up around 7 days a week, 11 o'clock every day, in fact, for an extended period of time.
Thank you.
So can I just ask, I understand corrections have monitors whose sole job it is to be inside of Buckley to monitor what's happening there. So what have they been doing while all this has been happening? Have they been reporting? Have they not been providing information on this stuff, given that they're supposed to be your eyes and ears in there?
Before I pass to the Acting Commissioner, can I say, as I've said and stated before, from the very start we had a coordinated approach right across our prison system and the management involving unions, justice health, management and staff. And I want to take the opportunity to congratulate that command post that did the contact tracing as well and worked incredibly hard in making sure that communication between our centres was the forefront of our fight against COVID and sharing some of those learnings. But Acting Commissioner?
Yes. Look, I think we're in a situation. Sorry, could you ask that question again, because I couldn't.
Yeah, sure. So you've got corrections are supposed to have monitors.
Oh yes. No. So the monitors are responsible for making sure that they comply with various procedures in that centre. We have a whole range of commissioners' instructions associated with COVID that have been released that are also applicable to the private sector. And it would be their responsibility just to look at whether they were implementing those commissioners' instructions. They're not health experts. And in fact, as Deputy Commissioner Grant alluded to, there was extensive interventions going on once that outbreak occurred in Parklea with the Department of Health and with a whole range of other expert bodies. And it would be recommendations from those people that we would have been looking at to make any changes to the operation at Parklea.
Thanks. Can I just also go back to just ask a follow-up question in regards to the person who died recently? So, sorry, can you just remind me, you said that when he was in hospital or moved to hospital, he was on bail? Is that can you just tell me what the
No, I think the bail would have been applied for post post his placement in hospital.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Because, you know, we as I said, would have to have had 6 people a day on somebody who's, unconscious.
Yeah, I understand that. Can I ask, and I don't mean to be crass about this, but does that, given those circumstances, does this person's death still count as a death in custody?
No, it doesn't, but my understanding is that the coroner can investigate any death, and we're currently engaged, with the coroner's office to advise them of this death and to see what action they would like to take.
So he was on bail, so he didn't have to be monitored, not to...
Yeah, he didn't have to be monitored.
Statistics?
Look,
I'm asking the question, you can answer it how you see fit.
Okay, look, I just think that, we've got a death. And that's being potentially, it could be part of a coronial investigation. The person wasn't in our custody. The person, under the judicial system, had been bailed. And I think, I'm very tragic.
I'm not going to retract it, but I appreciate the answer.
If I might assist as well, I'm sorry, but it's very hard to have this conversation when I'm out of the room. I'm sorry to be rude, I'm interjecting. However, just to make it very, very clear, in case there's any insinuation that we've manipulated a process for the purpose of statistics, which is an offensive concept, just to explain the process to you, that when anyone becomes ill in jail and their life is at risk, Justice Health, under our Act, are required to provide advice to us about those circumstances, which they did on this occasion. Our Sentence Administration Branch advised the parties about the health circumstance of that person, but we do not make available up to the person's defence to actually make such an application. So this happened on this occasion under a clause in our legislation. We advised the various parties. We had nothing to do with the process around bail itself. The court made a decision around bail based on a discussion with the person's own.
Thanks. Can I just ask a question in relation? I've got a few questions, but this one in particular in relation to a consequence of what's happening with the COVID, or what happened with the COVID outbreak. There is a person, and I'm sorry if I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, but Mustafa Balouche, who has escaped. He cut off his ankle bracelet, as we know, and he is who knows where, a millionaire drug dealer, allegedly. Now, the court documents in relation to him being granted bail say that the most compelling reason for that was because whilst he was in custody, he wasn't able to access legal representation in an appropriate way. This man is now who knows where. That's the responsibility of probably... partially you or the police or whoever is responsible for that, but the judge who granted bail said it was because he couldn't get access to legal representation. Can you respond to that?
So who made the allegations that he didn't have access to legal representation?
That's what the magistrate who granted bail said was one of the reasons why he was granted bail.
And who do we know who informed the magistrate of those allegations?
I don't know, but I'm asking you.
I probably would say it was probably his legal team, but can I say that throughout COVID, Corrective Services New South Wales has worked consistently to ensure inmates can maintain contact with lawyers throughout the related lockdowns. This individual, a 33-year-old bail-refused person, was admitted to Mid-North Coast Correctional Centre on Tuesday the 22nd of June of this year. Between the dates of the 28th of June and the 5th of October, the inmate has had 13 confirmed appointments with a legal practitioner conducted via AVL. The inmate also received or was forwarded physical legal mail on 3 separate occasions between the dates of 9th of July and 24th of September. Mid-North Coast Correctional Centre also provides inmates with access to in-cell tablet technology that can be used for a range of purposes, including phone calls to approved numbers. And again, these highly secure devices have been purpose-built for prison use. So I think in response to the question, I think having 13 confirmed appointments with their his legal practitioner between the 28th of June and the 5th of October, as well as receiving 3 separate legal males between the 9th of July and the 24th of September. I would just suspect the individual we're dealing with probably, let's just say, might have been a bit loose with the truth.
Look, that may well be the case, but the magistrate let him out.
I think the actual thing, the assertion was that it was with regards to access to the brief. And I suspect the problem with the brief was there was going to be mountains of telephone intercepts and the like. And so,
I guess, given the nature of the alleged offence.
yeah.
I'm sure all of those things are true, but now he's gone. He was in custody, and now he's gone. So somebody has to be responsible for that.
Well,
But look, even I will say this minister's not responsible for that. You know, I
day
want
has
to whack him
come.
over the head on all sorts of stuff, but even I'll say he's not
Shoebridge
responsible
defending
for
Robbo.
Strange bedfellows.
Minister.
yes.
Well, there's no evidence.
Okay,
he's
this is our time, David. David, this is our time. I acknowledge and Minister, I acknowledge and understand that today some of the questions involving counterterrorism might be taken on notice or the subject of a one-to-one briefing. And if you decide to do so, I understand that.
Thank you.
Okay. Minister, you would be aware of community concern, especially in the Jewish, Armenian, and Assyrian community about the activity of an Islamic extremist group called Hezbollah Tahrir. Now, this group has been recorded on video making statements like "Destroy the Jews," "O Allah, give us the necks of the Jews." So quite an extreme group. Now, last week, the New South Wales Police Counterterrorism and Special Tactics Commander Mark Walton confirmed that there was a May event, and an October recording of this event was put up on social media. So, and last night, I actually received a letter from the Minister for Multiculturalism, Natalie Ward, at 6:55, saying that she actually wanted to see this group banned. And this was in response to my representations. So I'll table, for the benefit of the committee, I'll table the letter. What is your response to this extremist group shouting hate on Sydney streets?
Well, it's clearly unacceptable and it's abhorrent. And I thank you for the question. I too am aware of the footage posted on YouTube by Hizb Tahrir, their rally, and now a second video, of course, of a rally held in May by this group. I want to, as you would say, place it on record, and that New South Wales is a strong and connected community. Unfortunately, there are a number of individuals with extreme and violent views who want to divide us and threaten our safety. And I want to place it on record again that there's no tolerance for this incitement to violence. Symbols of hatred and anti-Semitism are unacceptable anywhere in our community. This government is committed to addressing racially motivated hate crime, racial discrimination and racial vilification in New South Wales, and this includes public threats and incitement to violence on the basis of race or religion. The matter, I'm advised, this matter is being investigated by the Terrorism Intelligence Unit within the New South Wales Police Force, and if I can just be very careful in a public, other agencies have also, I think, shown an interest. All of those agencies take any form of bias-motivated crime seriously, and we've got in New South Wales, under the Police Force, a dedicated engagement and hate crime unit in the CT and Special Tactics Command, and they will continue to investigate hate-motivated incidents. We've committed, as a government, some $1.5 million over 4 years for the police to improve as well its capacity to tackle bias crime. And of course, on a broader extent is the fact that we have strong investment in countering violent extremism programs addressing extremism. Can I pass to the acting, where are we? Pia, the acting executive director of strategy.
Executive Director.
That's right. Yeah, I've got it here. Do you want to outline some of those strategies for us, please?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Minister. So the government provides funding for a range of measures to respond to extremism and counter-terrorism. That includes we host crowded places forums, every year in cooperation with New South Wales Police. The first Crowded Place Forum for this year was hosted with religious leaders, and at that forum we were also able to talk about our grant programs for CCTV and other measures to support religious leaders and religious communities. In addition, as the Minister mentioned, we have provided additional funding to New South Wales Police to improve their hate crime training and capability. We have commissioned research from Macquarie University looking at the nature and prevalence of online hate and far-right extremism, and that research was published last year. And the Minister has recently commissioned update to that research, looking particularly at the impacts of COVID on far-right extremism. In addition to that, of course, we fund, the New South Wales Government funds a compact community grants program, which focuses on improving community harmony in across New South Wales, and that funding has been increased, and it is now a 4-year funding program totalling $13.4 million.
Could I? Okay.
Say more, but that's probably the high-level detail.
Okay, could I take you to one of the measures? There's something called Step Together Hotline, a special hotline, 1-800-875-204. Now, this is a public hotline, and it was established in June 2017. Now, it's a hotline to help, I guess, people concerned about family members, friends, or loved ones who may be leading down the path of violent extremism. So I called the hotline yesterday to see if it's operating. It is operating. It is working.
Good.
I just wanted to check before I asked the question. You always do that. So how many calls were received, I guess, since in the last financial year? And it was reviewed in 2019. How do you determine the success of it, and what happens if you actually make a telephone call to it?
Okay, can I ask the acting director to
Sorry,
respond
through
to
the
that?
minister.
Thank you. That's
So the hotline has received 5,113 calls since it was launched in 2017.
Okay.
And in addition to that, and that includes web chats as well, and in addition to that, it's received 275,000 hits to the website. So there are people who are wanting information, obviously, about far-right extremism, who are concerned about family, friends, clients, neighbours who might be heading down the pathway to violent extremism. In terms of a call, so if a caller calls the hotline, as you would have experienced, Mr. Support, they have an opportunity to talk to one of our caseworkers to better understand some of the drivers of violent extremism, and they are provided with information and
Misunderstanding.
and also referrals to relevant support and other agencies.
Okay,
Sorry. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, how do you determine the effectiveness or success of it? What are your sort of your KPIs or your evaluation techniques?
So the Step Together service was evaluated over a period of 18 months when it was first launched. So that evaluation was funded by the Commonwealth Government, and it was evaluated every 6 months. So that last evaluation, I think, was completed in 2019. And we could provide you with some details about the outcomes of those evaluations. I don't have them to hand.
Could you take it on notice of the 5,113 calls? What actually happened with those calls? I mean, like your triaging of those calls. Okay, thank you.
So so we can take that on notice. I mean, at a high level, I could certainly assure you that where we are concerned about risk in some of those calls, obviously we either encourage the caller to contact the National Security Hotline, or otherwise we would do that. Occasionally, if we're also concerned, we might speak to New South Wales Police about some of the nature of those calls. And otherwise, we would work with the caller to provide support and information, and then encourage them, for example, to contact a local mental health service, or we might provide them with information, things to read, some tips about how they might talk to their friend or family member to dissuade them from continuing down that pathway. We also have a case management service, and we would, on occasions, refer the caller, for example, if the caller was, we would refer the caller to our case management service, which is called the Engagement and Support Program, and then that person would be referred to that, and there'd be an intake and assessment process according to those operational guidelines.
Thank you. Thank you.
And can I just place on record, that was a really good question, because I asked the same question when I took over. You know, you don't measure, you can't manage.
Cool. I'll just ask a quick question.
Yeah, go Robert.
Yeah, Minister, thanks.
It's all right. Your questions are better than my questions.
Minister, what has happened with the retired correctional facilities at Berowra, South Coast, Ivanhoe, Grafton and Berrima? What are you doing with these facilities?
We just... Great things. Great things. You just... Here's my... Where's the number?
Number 7.
That's got them. Jumping.
Oh, no,
It's all got to go.
No,
It's all got to go.
All got to go. SAL program.
Yeah, in 2016, the New South Wales Government announced Better Prisons, which was a program of reform and rebuilding that included a once-in-a-generation $3.8 billion investment in modern, secure, fit-for-purpose prisons. As part of that, we, apart from the massive new build, we actually looked at the future use of a number of centres, whether they were fit for purpose. So we actually had quite an ageing fleet of prisons in New South Wales. Some of those prisons were decided as part of an overall strategy in that delivery of service, and whether or not they were fit for purpose, to retire those facilities. There was a total. We've got. Do you want me to run through each one?
Yeah, just quickly, Minister. I'd just like to know what's going on with them. I mean, you're talking about an ageing fleet, but what now? These parts of the fleet have been retired. What's actually happening to them?
As these become decommissioned, there were 5 correctional centres: Berowra, Ivanhoe, Berrima, Grafton, and the Illawarra Reintegration Centre. They were retired in 2020, being no longer meeting the requirements of a modern fit-for-purpose network. Berowra, the future use of that centre will ensure jobs and investment for the community. The site has been subdivided, and ownership of the site will be jointly transferred to the local Aboriginal Land Council and the Berowra Shire Council in early November. Indeed, that's happening as we speak, with the council leasing its portion to Arana Haven for use as a drug and alcohol rehabilitation facility. This outcome is the result of, again, listening to the issues raised by the local community, as well as productive consultation between Properties New South Wales, which are managing this, the Shire Council, the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council, the local Aboriginal Land Council and Arana Haven Aboriginal Corporation. So the facility will be used for much needed drug and alcohol rehabilitation services for Aboriginal women, and provides for this substantial property, which includes some magnificent wetlands to be managed by the local Aboriginal Land Council. With respect to Ivanhoe, Corrective Services, as well as the Department for Primary and Decision Environment, have worked incredibly hard to find a potential future user for the facility that could provide a positive economic outcome for the community. A call for future use process was completed in 2020, and through this process, a potential future user of the property was identified. An Aboriginal land claim exists over the site, and Property New South Wales is seeking to resolve the claim with the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council to enable the sale of the site to Tronox Mining. Tronox Mining proposes using the former correctional centre as a housing base for workers employed in its newly established Atlas Campaspe mineral sands mining operation, which will also create employment opportunities in catering, cleaning, laundry, maintenance and administration within that local community. And a contract has been issued to Tronox Mining, and it's anticipated the sale of the site will be finalised by the end of this year, subject to the resolution of the land claim. Department of Community Justice currently has an interim licensing agreement with Taylor Rail for workers to use a number of the houses, laundry and catering facilities on the site while a transport hub is being built. With respect to Grafton Correctional Centre, Corrective Services engaged the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment to assist with the future use process at Grafton. A resolution of an Aboriginal land claim on the site has been achieved, with a portion of the site being divested to the Grafton Nedgerie Local Aboriginal Land Council in the first quarter of 22, and a portion of the site will be further transferred to New South Wales Health by January of 22, and a marketing campaign for the sale of the heritage precinct on the site is proposed to commence in the first quarter of 22 with Clarence Valley Council. I can inform you that they've indicated that they're not in a position to take on ownership of the site under the community use policy. With respect to the Illawarra Reintegration Centre, the Department of Communities and Justice has entered into a 3-year licensing agreement with Wollongong Emergency Housing Incorporated. The organisation's administrative office is now located on site. The flagship group have sub-licensed a portion of the premises to run disability programs for the site. However, to date, they have not utilised the site. And with respect to Berrima Correctional Centre, we've engaged the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment to assist with the future use process at Berrima, with a marketing campaign for expressions of interest for the sale of the site they commenced on the 18th of October of this year. Once that expression of interest has closed, an evaluation committee chaired by the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment will meet to assess those applications. But can I make it clear that the assessment of applicants for the site's purchase will take into consideration future economic and social benefit for the community. I mean, it's a tourist town. I think anything we can do there to increase jobs, open that facility up, care for the facility on a recurrent basis into the future is critical. But I can also inform this committee that an Aboriginal land claim was registered on the site of the 21st of October, and there are discussions with the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council in progress over the status of that claim. So again, at every stage, what we've tried to do is, where we're retiring these facilities. In the case of Ivanhoe, it was ensuring that there was employment in the town, which we've successfully achieved. For Bree, it was ensuring that we're able to provide better services and needed services for those communities that weren't there before. In the case of Grafton, it was working with the community and looking at the needs of, in the case of health, in the case of the local lands council, and other maybe tourist operators, to ensuring that those sites are used to the benefit of the community. With Illawarra, it was the same. So that's effectively been mothballed. So it could potentially at some stage, down the track, be used as another correctional facility. Highly unlikely, but it has been mothballed. So we're now utilising that facility for support to people in the community, who are vulnerable, and of course with Berrima, seeing what we can do there in conjunction with the community to actually turn that into something that is quite magic and provides employment. And again, it's a great attraction in the town and the local district.
Just one more.
Yeah, go.
Yeah. Minister, have you introduced in-cell technology or tablets you mentioned earlier this year?
Look, I've got to say, one of the great things about technology, I'm not saying I'm the most, sort of literate individual when it comes to these things, but one of the things that on coming into corrections that concerned me greatly was the fact that, while people are in corrections, we have the opportunity to change lives. So we get people in quite often who cannot read and write. They have no skills. So the ability to pivot, and particularly around COVID, and this has got to be one of the great, I think the great benefits and learnings out of COVID is we've been able to utilise some money from the New South Wales government to put in tablets where you can use those tablets, as I mentioned before, for legal representation, telephone calls. You can do your coursework. You can do any sort of therapy sessions. I've got to say, both the acting commissioner and deputy commissioner have just done a remarkable job with our team in rolling these out. So you have the stories where you have prisoners for the first time ever being able to see their child's bedroom or read them a story of a night. Just from a mental health perspective, it's just been amazing. And it is changing prisoners' lives. There's another exciting bit of kit that we're also rolling out. And this is with respect to, many of the people that come into our custody have pre-existing conditions, health conditions, that require a large amount of support. There is a new piece of kit we're trialling, and if there's anything I've forgotten around tablets, I'll get the acting commissioner to outline that. But it's a really good, it's a really good story to tell.
That's fine.
But there's one piece of kit you should know about.
Yes, yeah, thanks, Minister. Look, as part of our, response to deaths in custody, we're actually looking at trialling some new technologies in the Metropolitan Remand and Reception Centre. These technologies essentially give us some evidence of proof of life. So rather than, and in conjunction with the refurbishment of cells, we potentially could have a bit of a game changer here in terms of making sure that we can deal with people who are at risk or who've got medical conditions, because hanging points are not the only way you can commit suicide. So this particular technology, in fact, I've got an example of it. Here is a radar device that fits into a light fitting in the ceiling, so no further protection required. The protection comes from the light fitting, and it is able to measure heart rate and respiration, so and would send an alarm to a control room if that individual in the cell was in trouble. So these sort of technologies we're looking at to really ensure that we're moving forward with our response to deaths in custody.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Assistant Commissioner, Acting Commissioner. Minister, so do I understand it, the Ivanhoe facility, the proposal is for it to be sold to Tronox Mining, is that right?
My understanding is it is yes, it will be a sale. Let me just double check that.
I thought you said sale.
Yeah, let me just...
And I assume Tronox Mining is the US-based mining multinational. That's the one it's been sold to.
No, again, this is being handled by a different section of government to me, but I don't know who Tronox Mining is. But it is anticipated that it will be sold, and that sale will go through before the end of 21. It's subject to the resolution of the Aboriginal land claim.
And the proposal at the moment is to sell Grafton as well?
No, Grafton, as I said, so you'll have health utilising part of it. The Aboriginal Lands Council will be utilising part of it. And there is a marketing campaign for an expression of interest for the sale of the heritage precinct. So it could be anything, art gallery. It could be a restaurant. It could be accommodation.
Headquarters for a mining company.
In Grafton.
Well, it could be anything, I thought you said.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, it's but again, it's part of the consultation that we'll have with the community.
And what proportion of the site is proposed for sale? You said the heritage precinct. I think I'm familiar with Grafton. So the really nice bit is up for sale, and the crappy old bit will be held by the crappy new bits will be held by the public. Is that the idea?
Look,
it's very cynical, Dave.
Yeah, that's.
I'm just picturing Grafton, the kind of 50s, 60s, 70s. Stuff will be held by the public, and the really nice old bit will be sold off. Is that the plan?
Look, that's again, you'd have to probably seek advice from the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry, Environment. They are responsible for that.
And Berrima, is it proposed to sell Berrima too?
Yes, the marketing campaign for the expressions of interest for the sale of the site commenced on the 18th of October. And as I said before, once that is closed, an evaluation committee chaired by the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry, Environment will meet to assess the applications, taking into consideration future economic and social benefit for the community.
Each different government agency is given a target or a budget for the sale of public land and for the amount that's to be recovered from the sale of public land. What's the budget that Corrective Services has to meet in? What was it in last financial year, and what is it in the next financial year?
I'll take that on notice.
You're aware of the need to meet the budget, though, aren't you, Minister?
In fact, we've got a very good story about our budget.
Asking about the sale of public land.
Well, that's
Is there a good story about that?
Any question about the sale of these former operational centres is probably best directed to planning.
Yep. But I'm asking you what your budget is, what target it is you have to meet for the sale of public land.
I'm not...
Last financial year and this coming financial year. Acting Commissioner?
Yeah, do we have...
I'm not aware of a target.
I'm not aware of a target either. Well, we'll take it on notice.
You're aware of the $3 billion whole of government target that has been allocated to the different agencies. I'll ask that to the Acting Secretary.
I'm not aware of an allocation to the department, no.
Well, could you provide on notice the allocation to the department and particularly to Corrective Services?
If there is one.
Through your minister to the Acting Commissioner, the first internal spread of COVID at Parklea, it was a little unclear from me what the date was that Corrective Services was first advised of it. On one occasion I heard the 23rd I think on one occasion I heard the 23rd of August, and then another occasion I heard the 27th of August. What was the date that Corrective Services was first advised about the internal spread of COVID in Parklea?
Acting Commissioner.
Yeah, thanks, Minister. The 23rd of August was the first time we were advised that there was a transmission outside of quarantine. In other words, it wasn't somebody who had contracted it, in the community and come in.
Maybe if we just say the first time someone contracted COVID in Parklea, that's what we're talking about.
No, the first time someone, contracted COVID in Parklea, that's what we become aware of. Of course, that is subject to investigation through the Kirby Institute, and they'll be doing epidemiological studies into the genomics of each of those infections. But once that happened, I ordered that, the entire centre be tested, and that's when we became aware of other infections.
But I also thought I heard you say, Acting Commissioner, that you found out on a Sunday night.
No, I didn't find out on a Sunday night. After I received information that the infection had spread, that's when I started thinking I need to make a decision here to close this place down, and start a process of identifying where other people who've been transferred out of Parklea were, and start putting them into quarantine so we could test those individuals as well.
Well, you see that the 23rd is a Monday, and if you first started raising those kinds of responses on a Sunday, the earliest that could have happened would be the 29th. So what happened on the 24th, the 25th, the 26th, the 27th and the 28th was COVID just spreading in Parklea?
So what we were doing was locking areas down in Parklea and testing all the inmates during that period.
When you found, you say Corrective Services found out about the first transmission on the 23rd. When was Parklea first aware that they'd had a COVID case within Parklea and the transmission within Parklea? When was Parklea first aware of it?
Well, we've investigated this, and the best information that we can come up with is the same date, but that is also the subject of the investigation by this independent investigator, just to get to the bottom of that issue.
Have Parklea been cooperative in the investigation?
We'd have to speak to the investigator about that, but certainly I think with the Kirby Institute, by all means.
Certainly.
Acting Commissioner?
Yes, certainly the the Department of Health, as Deputy Commissioner Grant was alluding to, had been engaged in a daily process. They basically took over the management of that outbreak. They were concerned about it and put huge resources from a public health perspective into identifying what was going on and advising St Vincent's what to do in respect of this outbreak.
Will Parkley be paying the cost of that?
That would be something I'd have to take on notice, but certainly from a St Vincent's Health point of view, they would certainly be paying for that. And as I said, they put significant resources into making sure that that outbreak was contained.
Mr. Chairman, me being my usual helpful self that I am.
We're having a COVID-safe break now, I think.
I know, me being my usual very helpful self to this committee, we've been able to get a clarification with respect to those potential capital sales for you. Would you like that answer now?
That would be good.
Yeah, we're about to have a break now for
We get the
15
numbers
minutes.
and then go to break. The
Sorry?
numbers on the sales.
I
yeah.
just have a quick answer.
Oh, okay, yep.
The Department of Communities and Justice has not been allocated any capital sales targets by government. Our finance team has confirmed that.
All right, we'll break now
service.
and come back at 11:15.
Lovely. Oh,
Thank you. Now, ready for opposition questions.
Okay, are we resuming?
We resume, yes.
Yep.
We're on the air.
Okay, well, in the last bracket, I'm sorry, I can't remember your surname. Her first name was Pia? I'm sorry. Yeah, Pia, through the minister.
Thank you.
Some questions about Step Together. You mentioned 5,113 calls. I would like to know how many of them were referred to police?
So I will take that question on notice, and I'd also just need to be careful just about reporting that in terms of sensitivity. So if I could take that question on notice.
Okay, but I'm just asking for a figure. I'm not asking for individual cases. And of those calls, did the calls increase during COVID, if you're taking it on notice? And also, could I have a breakdown between religious extremism, far-right extremism, and far-left extremism of the calls?
Mr. Chair, could I just,
Yeah.
could we possibly, I'm just cognizant of issues around the sensitivity of that. Would you be happy, Mr. Secord, if we directly briefed you on that? That would be
Minister, I understand that. So I'll leave it to you and your senior officials to what information you can publicly disclose. I understand that. And yes, I'd like to avail upon you to have a private briefing.
Thank you.
On that note, actually, it leads me to, I want to be sensitive about how we discuss this, but with recent overseas events involving public officials in the United Kingdom, about increased, I guess, protection or awareness of security involving public officials. If you could just be mindful, anything that you take on notice or provide private briefings, I understand. But Minister, could you make some observation?
Yes. A broader
I understand.
statement.
It's a very sensitive area. And I also appreciate matters that you and I have discussed, and I appreciate your sensitivity and your alertness to it.
Look, thank you, Mr. Secord. This relates specifically around Sir David Amos and his constituency, his surgery that occurred on the 15th of October. His murder is alleged to have been religiously motivated and is under review as an act of terror. I think it shocked Western democracy that this occurred. But can I say that this government takes, when I'd say every member of this parliament condemns any act of terrorism and violence, as you'd be aware that Australia's national terrorism threat level is probable, with the primary threat remaining religiously motivated violent extremists. However, of course, ASIO has also acknowledged the increasing threat proposed by ideologically motivated extremists who we know are becoming more organised, sophisticated and active than in previous years. But certainly, look, our system of government and democracy must never back down in response to cowardly acts of violence. Indeed, every member of parliament needs to be able to speak openly and honestly about issues that they represent from their constituencies without fear of violence, intimidation, in cases in this House, threats to themselves, damage to their property. So I can inform you that immediately after the incident in the United Kingdom, I asked various agencies for a review of security arrangements for members of Parliament and their staff, because this is a credible threat to not just members of Parliament, but to our system of democracy. And as I said before, for people to be able to, without fear, state their cases on behalf of the people that they represent. As you mentioned, and I thank you for that, for obvious security reasons, it's not the best forum to discuss specifically or specific details around this review, but we've made it quite clear that if any members of Parliament feel that they are threatened or are in a position where they may come into danger themselves or their families, and we all know of plenty of cases in this place of death threats, particularly in recent times, that appear to be escalating, and that is certainly a focus of the review, not just by the New South Wales Police Force, but other agencies. I'm happy to, when we arrange a further security review with yourself, to outline that further. But we are taking the threat against members of Parliament and their families very, very seriously.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I'll leave it at that. I won't do any follow-ups.
Thank you.
Now, you'd be aware that the Prime Minister has recently written to, I think it's 4 state premiers, about the management of high-risk terrorist offenders. These are people who have been in custody and have served their time and then have been released into the community. And unfortunately, point to New Zealand, the September 3rd supermarket attack in Auckland, where he was an ISIS supporter. So after spending 3 years in prison, he was released into the community in July 2021, and he was monitored by the New Zealand Intelligence Service with, I think, at some points, up to 30 police officers monitoring him. And in fact, because of that monitoring, they were able to actually apprehend him and kill him in the supermarket. So what's the situation on high-risk terrorist offenders in New South Wales and when they're released to the community? And I understand if there are certain things that you can't discuss, but what is your response to the Prime Minister's request in this area?
Look, thank you for the question, and I'll try to be as helpful as I can, whilst taking into account the security implications. But currently, our status with respect to offenders currently subject to orders under the THRO scheme as of the 1st of October. We have no continuing detention orders. We have 2 interim detention orders. We have 8 extended supervision orders and 1 interim supervision order. Under the New South Wales scheme, the Terrorism High Risk Offenders Act of 2017, those continuing detention orders and extended supervision orders may be imposed on offenders who pose an unacceptable risk of committing a serious terrorism offence in the future. These offenders don't need to have committed a terrorist act or terrorism offence to be covered by the New South Wales scheme, and this is where the scheme differs to the Commonwealth legislation under the Criminal Code. Under the Criminal Code Amendment, High Risk Terrorist Offenders Act of 2016, the Commonwealth can seek a continuing detention order in respect of prescribed Commonwealth terrorism offences where the offender represents an unacceptable risk of committing a terrorism offence if they are released. And I have, at the moment, I might ask Pia where we're up to with the numbers potentially coming from the Commonwealth, if you're able to.
Yeah, I might have to take the exact numbers as of today on notice, Minister, but I can inform the committee that in terms of Commonwealth terrorist offenders, there's 2 options. One is continuing detention orders, as the Minister has referred to. The other option is, or an option we would like, is for the provision of an extended supervision order. And those amendments are part of Commonwealth legislation that I think has recently been tabled in the Australian Parliament that has not yet been passed. So at this stage, we have continuing detention orders that we can rely on, and we are hopeful of Commonwealth legislation being passed so that there would be provision for extended supervision orders to be made in New South Wales for those offenders as well.
Minister, through the Minister, so can you please give a bit more of a description on what New South Wales would like to see in this regard?
If you'd like to unpack that, Pierre, certainly from our perspective, we work closely with the Commonwealth. As I said, we've got very strong powers in New South Wales. But certainly the management of those offenders and the various conditions we place upon them, some would say they are very broad and they are very deep, everything from conditions that require home visits by enforcement officers, enabling us to seize at any time a computer, electronic equipment or data in possession of that offender at his or her address. We can make sure that they periodically report to an enforcement services officer Part of that is, of course, our programs around participating in rehabilitation and treatment. Of course, we have the electronic monitoring equipment, and we can also stop them going to certain localities or specified locations or classes of locations. So that could be anything from synagogues to mosques to churches to shopping centres or local government areas. Specifically, where this is effective, and that is ensuring that they don't associate or contact specified persons or classes of persons, that they don't engage in specified conduct or classes of conduct, and they can't engage in specified employment or classes of employment, which is critical when you're dealing with these individuals. And of course, they're not being able to change their name or appearance. Did you want to add anything to that, Pia, at all?
No, that's very comprehensive, Minister.
Thank you.
I'd only add that in terms of what we would like from the Commonwealth, and we've been heavily engaged both from a bureaucratic level with our department and Home Affairs, and also the Minister has engaged directly with his counterparts at the Commonwealth level. We would like to see that legislation passed as soon as possible to enable the courts to at least consider extended supervision orders and hopefully make extended supervision orders, which would allow, as the Minister's explained, for a range of items in an order that would allow for supervision and management in the community and engagement with programs in the community. So in addition to the passing of legislation, of course, we work very closely with the Commonwealth in the way that legislation would be implemented, and we're working regularly and meeting fortnightly in terms of how the framework for implementation of those laws would be delivered in New South Wales and the cost implications.
Minister, in your answer, you made reference in passing to people, or restrictions on people changing their names or changing their appearance. So have there been cases of people who have tried to change their names or change their physical appearance? What are you referring to? Removal of beards or physical changes like what are you referring to?
Yeah, so with respect to changing of names, and I can certainly see whether there's been any breaches. I'll have to take that on notice, Mr. Scord. But with respect to changing of appearances, that would be very much around effectively, sort of by changing appearance, attempting to disguise your identity.
Now, coming back to sort of monitoring individuals, now, does New South Wales play a role in the sense of, I guess several years ago there were the ISIS brides and jihadis and people engaging in foreign activity, like Syria, ISIS, and that kind of stuff. So are there restrictive measures in place in New South Wales in regard to people like that, ISIS brides and jihadi brides?
If I'll ask the acting director, I just don't want to give any information up that may in any way cause security issues. Pia, do you think you can outline that as best as possible?
I can, but perhaps could you just clarify the question, Mr. Secord?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if there was a New South Wales role. Several years ago, there was quite a bit of, I think 2019, there were 70 Australian women and children in northeast Syria.
Still are.
And quite a few of them are still there, but some of them did come back. And I know that there was a high-profile case of a woman who had migrated to Australia at the age of 6 from New Zealand, and she moved overseas and became involved in the jihadi movement. And she came back to Australia. She had her citizenship removed, and she was deported to New Zealand. So about 70 of them. And I just wanted to know what's the situation in New South Wales, and is there a New South Wales government role in regard to ISIS brides or jihadi foreign fighters returning?
Yes, there is a New South Wales government role. So some of the individual matters you are speaking of are subject to suppression orders, so we aren't able to talk about the details of those matters. But in terms of the arrangements in New South Wales, they're very comprehensive. There's a strategy for managing the return of families of foreign fighters that has been agreed by Cabinet, and that has been implemented, as you say, several times with people returning. And that strategy sets up very comprehensive governance and operational arrangements for safely reintegrating people when they return. Of course, as you'd appreciate, the first part of that work sits squarely with the Commonwealth, and there's a number of agencies at the Commonwealth level that work in overseas territories and also in the return of families. But once people arrive at Sydney Airport, then there's a comprehensive role for New South Wales Government, and it involves Premiers and Cabinet, Department of Communities and Justice and my office, obviously, but also New South Wales Health, Education, and obviously heavy involvement from New South Wales Police.
Thank you very much. Minister, you'd be aware that prescribing terrorist organizations is a federal government responsibility, but states and territories do give input, give views and things like that. And earlier this week on Monday, the Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett asked the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison at Glasgow to designate Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. And I guess I would asking, what's your view on prescribing Hezbollah? And if there's any comment you could make about activity in New South Wales, but again, I understand you can refer to what you wish, and I won't push you in that regard.
No, I appreciate that. Terrorist organisations are listed in the Criminal Code Act, the Commonwealth one of 1995. With respect to Hezbollah, I'm advised that Australia, like the European Union, has banned the external security organisation of Hezbollah, not the group as a whole. For an organisation to be listed, the Commonwealth Minister of Home Affairs must be satisfied on reasonable grounds that the organisation is directly engaged in or preparing, planning, assisting in or fostering the doing of a terrorist act or advocates the doing of a terrorist act. So from New South Wales perspective, we provide advice as well as intelligence to the Commonwealth about listing or relisting terrorist organisations. And that was set out in an intergovernment agreement on counter-terrorism laws in 2004. In New South Wales, it's myself. I respond to the Commonwealth on behalf of the Premier. So that is an ongoing. I've just got to be careful. There are ongoing discussions between the Commonwealth and the states around this issue.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Moriarty?
Yeah, I think there's just a couple of minutes left in this round, so I might just do some wrap-up questions on COVID. Where are we at with staff vaccination? So I think we covered some questions about inmates. I know it's now compulsory for staff, so how is that going? How many staff are done, but also what's the impact of the compulsory nature of it?
You happy with
Yeah, thanks, Minister. Yeah, I do have that answer close by.
I've got it.
Also on page 1.
Yeah, page 1. I think it's.
There you go. Down the bottom.
It's called.
In terms of staff vaccinations, it's 67.6 percentage of staff have received their first dose as at 1st of October. But in the prisons, of course, at 46.4 are fully vaccinated. But in the prisons, of course, as at the 25th of October, we had to have everybody fully vaccinated, or at least have their first dose, or booked in for their first dose. So that has occurred, and as a result of that, I think there are 17 people who are refusing or have refused to comply with that direction.
Bless you.
And those individuals subject to interaction with the professional standards branch at the moment. But as I understand it, some of them are actually then agreeing to, once they get their letters, then agreeing to get vaccination. But those numbers are varying day by day, obviously.
So there's a broad DCJ
I missed the first number. Sorry, Assistant Commissioner. What were the numbers for the department? This is for corrective services.
The overall corrective services. Yep. As at 1st of October, it was 67.6 had their first dose, 46.4. But that's as of the 1st of October. Those numbers have changed considerably since then, and those numbers reflect the people that have put forward their information on the vaccination, I guess, database that we have at the moment. What we're finding is that the bulk of people have been vaccinated, but they just haven't entered their data. So that data is a little dated.
And then there's a part of a broader DCJ policy that I might get the Acting Secretary to elaborate on, if you wouldn't mind.
Thanks, Minister. So all staff have been notified within the department with respect to dates and by which they need to be vaccinated. We've had quite a positive response to that, and I can give a slightly more current number, but for the entirety of the department. So the entirety of the department has about 25,000 staff. As of the 3rd of November, 21,000 staff have reported their status. 98% of those have had at least one dose. Now, not all staff are subject to having to report yet, so the difference between the 21 and the 25,000, there are still a number of staff that don't have to report yet, so we're still waiting on that. And as Kevin, the Acting Commissioner, mentioned, we are still working through data validation, so the process is continuing, but we've had quite a positive response to staff vaccination.
Yeah, if I might just elaborate, those percentages I gave you were the percentage of staff that were administered a vaccine by Justice Health. So a lot of them obviously got their vaccines in the community as well. That's why our numbers are so high in actuality.
Did you finish on that, Tara? Minister, either to you or through you to one of the officials, a number of New South Wales prisons are designated places of immigration detention. Are you aware of that?
Thanks, Minister. If there is a person who is an immigration detainee, then we would be able to keep them in any facility around the place. I mean, it might be someone who has had their sentence expire, but immigration require us to keep them in custody. And we do have something like about 900, I can't recall the exact number, people who are of interest to immigration in the system at the moment, but they're spread throughout the system.
Wow.
You're getting ahead of me there.
Sorry.
No, but that's okay. That's not a bad thing. So are you saying that all prisons...
See? Yeah, don't do that again.
No.
Sorry about that.
I should have said nothing.
I think what he's saying is give him nothing.
So all prisons in New South Wales, Acting Commissioner, all prisons are designated as immigration detention facilities. Is that your evidence? Or
No, they're not designated as immigration detention facilities. They're correctional centres.
Yeah.
But we do have people in there that are of interest to immigration,
Yep.
and we also at times assist Border Force in keeping particular people who are regarded as too problematic to be placed in an immigration detention facility.
all right. So as I understand it, that there's a class of inmates who are held in New South Wales prisons who have finished their term of imprisonment but continue to be held in prison at the direction of Border Force. That's right?
That's correct.
Now some of those are you saying because Border Force has said the preference is that they be held in a New South Wales prison rather than put in an immigration detention centre?
Yes, they make a request to us. We consider that request, and if approved, there is a financial consideration for that as well from the Commonwealth.
Well, could you provide on notice, unless you've got the data there in front of you, how many people are being held in New South Wales prisons at the moment, having finished their term of imprisonment, but are being held there at the request or direction of Border Force?
I think the number that I've just been given is 4.
4? And how many has it been over the course of the last financial year?
I'd have to take that one on notice, sorry.
And could you provide on notice the longest period that somebody's been held in a prison in New South Wales as a form of immigration detention as opposed to being held for a custodial purpose.
Yes, we can take that on notice.
They could be exercising their rights of appeal, one suspects.
Well, are there, of the people being held in prison, who have concluded their term of imprisonment, but are there at the request of Border Force, is some of that because there is no position of, there's no capacity in immigration detention? It's a question of capacity. You just can't get them out of the prison system into immigration detention?
No, it's not a question of capacity. It's a question of whether the immigration detention facilities are built to a standard that would enable them, the operator to manage that individual in an immigration detention centre. So they are, the ones that generally end up in our custody are quite problematic and generally have criminal records, extensive criminal records.
In terms of, are there individuals who have been granted parole yet are being held in prison at the direction of Border Force for immigration purposes?
I'd have to take that one on notice as well, but generally I think, and it might be something I could, through the Minister, flick to Sandra there, but, the Assistant Commissioner, Community Corrections. But generally, if they were due for parole and they were due to be deported, then action would be taken to deport them when they were ready to be paroled.
Excepting if they're exercising their rights of appeal against the deportation.
That's right. And in that case, then they would be, would stay in custody.
The question is, would they stay in a New South Wales prison or would they be held in immigration detention? Which is the question I'm asking, and so maybe Ms. Crawford might be able to assist.
Well, I can answer that. The question would be that Border Force would make that determination whether they would accept them into an immigration detention facility if they were due for parole but due to be deported.
Well, yes, the Border Force, and then it's at Border Force's request. Corrective Services may retain somebody in prison.
That's right.
Although they've been granted parole.
Yeah, that's correct.
And I wonder if Ms. Crawford could assist on any numbers in that regard, either currently, or both currently and over the last financial year, Ms. Crawford.
Assistant Commissioner.
Thank you. I would need to take that question on notice in terms of the numbers.
Through you, Minister, it's probably to the Deputy Commissioner Grant. It's about the thematic review. Deputy Commissioner, the thematic review was commenced on the 18th of October. Is there an intent to seek public submissions or broader submissions from out? Well, I'll leave it at that. What's the intent in terms of public submissions or stakeholder submissions?
Deputy Commissioner.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Shubridge. We're very pleased with the process that we've initiated to undertake this review. It's got multiple components. One of the components is I suppose you might describe it best as a deep listening component, where we're going to speak to people of deaths in custody and also for advocates who are advocating on their behalf. So that process, which we're waiting for COVID to end because we just didn't think it would be able to be facilitated online, will occur in the near future. So we've engaged in a co-design phase at the moment with Aboriginal people about how that should occur. But the intention is to have an expertly facilitated forum where people who've had that experience, families and people who are advocates or people affected by deaths could actually participate in a process where they share their experience and their views about what might need to change. So we're not going to take formal submissions to the review, but advocates would be participating in that process and have the opportunity to do that. But if anyone wanted to make a submission, they'd be most welcome to. I don't think there'd be an exclusion, it just isn't our intention. But I can just explain the process. I don't want to take up too much of your time. But we're doing it that's never been done before. We're doing the standard things like undertaking a literature review and doing some statistical analysis of deaths over the most recent batch of deaths. We're also doing a very deep dive into all of the thinking and all of the decisions and all of the observations that have come from things like root cause analyses undertaken by Justice Health, the coroner's investigations, the corrective services, internal investigations, and our incident reports, all those documents using some contemporary text mining tools are being worked through by an expert team from Monash University who are going to pull from it recurring themes and bring a lot of other information ultimately to a synthesis. And oversighting the whole thing, what makes this very different to anything else we've done is we have a very high level expert, independent expert committee chaired by an Aboriginal professor of infectious diseases from Queensland, Jane Ward, and very ably assisted by a number of very experienced Aboriginal people, including Sandra Bailey, who is the head of the Aboriginal Health and Medical Research Council, but also assisted the Royal Commission in Victoria. Robin, a psychiatrist from New South Wales, a retired Deputy State Coroner, the head of Aboriginal Affairs, a range of Aboriginal community members. That group together will be coming together to look at all of the information that's come from these various sources. And the final piece, which I think will be of some interest to everybody here, is that we're also looking at all of the Royal Commission recommendations that may have an impact or may be of interest to the Minister, that are the responsibility of corrective services and justice health. So of the full 337 odd recommendations, about 110 of them are the direct responsibility of justice health or of corrective services. We're going to go through each one of those and assemble all the evidence we can find for the status of their implementation. And we're going to ask the expert committee, we've already started this process, we're about halfway through, maybe that's too optimistic to say halfway, it takes a lot of time to go through each recommendation, but we're well advanced in this process and we're asking the expert committee to sign off on this, to say whether they're satisfied with the status of the implementation of those recommendations, if they haven't been appropriately or fully recommended and implemented, or if they're no longer relevant for a variety of reasons. All that will feed into the review, and we'll be producing a very comprehensive report to the Minister when we've completed that from all of these parts. So I think nothing of this depth has ever been completed. We really are taking it seriously, but I know it's taken a long time. But the listening experience and taking on board people's views is a very sensitive and important part of it, and often the coronial process has become increasingly adversarial from our perspective. It's meant to be an inquisitorial process, but we end up being in that situation where people coming and effectively demanding a prosecution of staff. It's not conducive to us being able to listen very well or easily to families' views. So we're trying to set up something that's very respectful, that's outside of that, designed in conjunction with Aboriginal people to capture those views. And as a separate listening experience, we're also going to listen to the staff members who have been exposed to deaths in custody in the coronial process, who also suffer a lot through this process. I can't tell you, I can't emphasise strongly enough what happens when someone dies in jail and how much it affects the staff. I think people assume that it captures the headline that it's a frequent event, but it's a fairly infrequent event. A lot of correctional centres, people will never see a death in custody, and they are very shocked when it happens, and we want to work through the process with them to try and see how can we support them following the death, and how can we support them through the coronial process, which also has its consequences.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. The terms of reference also include, as part of the thematic review, regard to the recommendations from the Select Committee of Inquiry into the overrepresentation of First Nations peoples in custody. What will the review, or what's the intent of the review have in regard to that report and the findings of that report?
Deputy Commissioner.
So the recommendations that relate specifically to us, there's some broader recommendations that are outside of this. Is anything within the Minister's purview. We'll also be going through a similar process. So we're really waiting to go through and pull together this information. At the moment, we've just started to complete the literature review. We haven't heard from the families, and that is an important part of the process as well. I'm sorry that I omitted to mention that, particularly as you have a particular interest in it, but that's absolutely part of it. The recommendations relevant to corrective services will be part of the process, and the committee will have an opportunity to comment on the approach that needs to be taken to those recommendations that relate to us and the extent to which we have already implemented them or not. Some of them, they cross over. One of them, those recommendations that are where relates to the implementation of Royal Commission recommendations. A bit of an interaction between the two.
In terms of that initial analysis that's been done, of the extent to which the recommendations of the Royal Commission have been implemented, I think you said you're a good way into that. Might be a fair summary of your evidence in that regard.
I might overstate that. I know it's taken a long time to do it. The interesting part of the practice is people are pushing back. And we've got advocates like the senior advocates in legal aid who want to see absolute documentary evidence of everything. So that we're taking it very, very seriously. We've certainly gone through, and I can't tell you how many we've gone through so far.
Deputy Commissioner, I'm not trying to trip you up on this. I understand that will be a lengthy and contested process, would be my guess. I've had a look at your panel, and I assume it's going to be a lengthy and contested process. What I am going to ask, I'm interested though, is when there is a document setting out the understanding of the extent to which those recommendations have been implemented or not implemented, will that be made public during the currency of the review?
Well, before the review is completed, are you suggesting?
Yes.
It's certainly because it's our intention to communicate with people. I know there's a lot of investment in it, so I can get that undertaken now. But as we complete that work, maybe when we've completed that segment of the work, it will predate the full report. Very happy to put that on our website. So I think from our perspective, we get sick of people, for instance, telling us that we haven't implemented Royal Commission recommendations. And, I've probably said this before to your other inquiries. I've been doing this for 30 years, along with many of my colleagues. We take the recommendations really seriously. I'm very confident when people look at those recommendations, they're going to see a lot of them have been implemented perfectly. I'm not suggesting all of them have been, but a lot of them have been. And we've got a real investment in having that out in the public domain so that people have got more confidence that we have taken it seriously. And I think that more important to us, we want to move on Royal Commission recommendations. And if I might, I know it's a bit of an indulgence, but if I might acknowledge just in today's meeting that the death of Hal Wooten earlier this year, who was a great mentor to me, and he was involved in our Aboriginal Advisory Committee for many years. And he made a very powerful statement in his speech that he gave for the 20th anniversary of the Royal Commission. He was the New South Wales Royal Commissioner, where he said, the National Report wasn't a revelation from on high, not a font of perennial wisdom, not the end of history, but a passing moment in it. It was a response to the problems of the time by people of the time using tools of the time. Take what you can from it and move on. It's now your thinking, your imagination, your dedication and your professional commitment that's needed. And we're rising to that challenge. We're using different tools. We want to put the Royal Commission recommendations to rest and to move forward with some more strategies to do this. And I think that's, we're taking a lot from Hal Wooten at this. I just wanted to acknowledge his amazing contribution to the state.
But you acknowledge the best way to put those recommendations to rest is to implement the recommendations.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. No, there's nothing, I wouldn't agree more with that.
Is there a time frame for the review?
Deputy Commissioner?
Well, there was a time frame for the review, however, it's been extended through a variety of COVID-related issues. I mean, we're working through everything at the moment. Our original intention was to have it wrapped up before the end of this year. However, because we haven't been able to do the community consultations, it won't be wrapped up in that time. So every aspect of it is underway except for the work around the listening experience. The other stuff is progressing very well already. We've got people engaged with various levels.
Deputy Commissioner, I think anybody would accept that COVID would have thrown a spanner in the works in terms of the initial time frame, and I accept that the listening experience is not just an add-on, but core to the process. So I'm just going to ask you, what's your expectation in terms of the final reporting date?
Deputy?
Well, I'd be hoping, speaking being appointed, and I am hoping to have it finished within the first 3 months of next year now, something like that. So I think it's unlikely we'll be able to get the listening process undertaken and completed. I think that the people we engage to do this work and to commence the process of engagement, we've got some fantastic people in the co-design process who are outside of the reference committee, including some members of our Aboriginal Advisory Council. They're all engaged in the process with a 12-week time frame just for that component of the work. So we're just at the beginning of the co-design phase at the moment. So it's going to be 12 weeks from that time, which would take us into the beginning of next year. And then we need to bring it all together and synthesise it to everyone's satisfaction. So hopefully I'd be saying by March next year. That would be my optimistic.
Thanks, Deputy Commissioner. Minister, again going to page 1 of your briefing notes, what are the number of inmates in New South Wales prisons at the moment, both male and female?
There are currently, as of the 17th of October, 12,218 inmates.
And do you have a breakdown on the number of women in jail and the number of men in jail?
I've got that here.
You go to page 1 of your notes.
Yeah, I've got it on page 1.
I thought so.
So there are 801 female inmates and 3,000. Did you ask for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander?
Oh, that was my next question.
Oh, okay.
Just let him ask.
Again.
Yeah, just get in. No,
It's most efficient if we do them both at once. So if you could, yep.
Yeah, 3,378 First Nation inmates.
Sorry, so could you just give me the breakdown on men and women, and then also, if you could, First Nations men and women?
So I can give you that there are 11,416 males, 802 females. Of that, 7,000. Oh, yeah, I'll get you to ask the next question.
Well, could you give the breakdown on First Nations? You've added one to the Assistant Commissioner's numbers, but
I think there might be a different date,
that's
unfortunately.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have respect to. I'll pass across to you for the
First Nations.
First Nations.
Okay, so First Nations inmates, I mean, this might be a different date from the ministers, 3,378.
perhaps if you've got consistent data on the same date, Assistant Commissioner, if you could give us the
Total.
if you could give us that
12,000.
breakdown.
As at 31st of October, 12,318 total prison population.
Yep.
And of those, 801 were female inmates.
All right. And of the total number of inmates, did you say 3,378 were First Nations?
Yes.
And then do you have that broken down between men and women?
I have to...
I can answer that if you wish. So the 3,101 men and 277 women.
Is it true that the proportion of women in jail who are First Nations has grown over the last 2 years?
Deputy Commissioner.
I would have to take that on notice because I know that the recent decline in the prison population has very much favoured women and Aboriginal women, maybe slightly less. So I haven't analysed that in the last few months. So I'm sorry, I'll take that on notice and I'll get back to you about it.
All right. I was waiting to be pulled up by the chair, but that's not going to happen. So I'm going to hand over to the opposition.
Okay.
My last. You're the deputy chair. You should.
He's very slack, the deputy chair.
Just throw to me.
Great.
No discipline.
Can I ask, so all of your facilities are still closed to visitors because of COVID at the moment, is that correct?
Close to visitors, correct?
Yeah, what's the proposal for reopening them?
Assistant Commissioner.
Yes, we're going through a process of developing a recovery plan at the moment, and I understand it was the 29th of November that we're proposing to open up visits again.
Okay. Thanks. Can I ask about the rather large incident that occurred at Parklea Prison in July, the riot? I know there are a couple of matters relating to that are before the courts. I don't intend to mess with what's happening there, but I do want to get some information about what did happen during that riot. So my understanding is there were around 60 inmates involved, including the 14 who somehow made it to the roof. Can you give us some information on what happened?
Before I pass over to the Acting Commissioner, the disturbance at Parklea Correctional Centre on the 12th of July is the only major disturbance at the centre since March of 2019. The incident started when a number of inmates accessed a roof area and refused to comply with staff directions. I'm informed that there are around 50 inmates in the yards that also refused staff directions. Centre staff deployed chemical munitions to clear the yards to regain the good order and security of the centre. Inmates also lit fires within wings that required a response from New South Wales Fire and Rescue. And I'll pass over from an operational point of view. I understand that the Centre's immediate response team and as well as the Corrective Services SOG did an excellent job. But Acting Commissioner?
Yeah, thanks, Minister. You pretty much summed it up, actually, what went on. So the incident, was contained in a pretty rapid manner. Considering there were a number of people up on the roof, so that presents an extremely dangerous situation. The staff, the specially trained security operations group, were able to contain that and get them down fairly quickly.
So how do you define rapid? How long did it take to get the situation under control?
I think it was about 4 or 5 hours.
And sorry, can you just confirm how many people were involved?
50.
Different numbers there.
50 inmates in the yards, and I think they're probably, I haven't got the numbers here of that were on the roof, but I think it was probably under 20 that were on the roof.
I appreciate that it was under control in 4 hours. Well done to the team that did that, but 4 hours?
Yeah.
Maximum security. What was the cost of the damage?
You might have to take that on
Yes,
notice.
I think I will have to take that one on notice.
Thanks. And so, again, I know there's a few issues before the court, so I'm not asking about those, but in terms of ramifications or consequences for people who are not in that situation, what were the consequences for the 57 odd, if I've got them, and probably not, but however many people were involved that aren't before the courts?
With the consequences, they would have been locked in their cells and subject to some restrictions, and that process would have been gradually opened up over a number of weeks.
And so can you give us some information about why this incident occurred? Obviously, there's been some commentary, or there was certainly commentary at the time that people were complaining about conditions. I understand this is a maximum security situation, and I'm not in there to understand what's true or what's not, so I'd like to get some information about what the complaints were.
Okay, so the investigations we've done, which obviously ongoing, but also relate to listening to phone calls and things of that nature. The investigations indicated that or suggested the incident was in fact related to getting hold of drugs that have been thrown onto the roof of that part of the facility.
So, some of the things that I've been told is that I don't doubt that there are probably some people that were in that situation. Having said that, I don't know. Again, that's before the courts, but there are some complaints that it was about treatment inside of the facility, including there's allegations of racial complaints. Yep. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, certainly I haven't been briefed on that. The only briefing I've got so far was that it was related to retrieving drugs from the roof.
Okay, so yeah. Okay.
So can I just, through the chair, I'm always happy to assist, but
always,
we know that. Always. But can I just respectfully ask that again, this is still a matter for a police investigation, and I think we need to be mindful of that.
Understood. Can I ask, Minister, and I don't mean this flippantly, but how do you lose an entire maximum security prison to mice?
They're very well organised mice.
Look, with respect to, was a mice plague. I mean, we build prisons to, keep people in.
Not to keep mice out.
So, due to the ongoing impact of the rural mouse plague at Wellington Correctional Centre, all inmates and most staff have been relocated to the other correctional centres while urgent and necessary remediation work can be undertaken. We had been dealing with that mouse plague since November of 2020, which took, as you mentioned, a significant toll on the infrastructure and the conditions for staff and inmates. The damage included internal wiring and ceiling panels, and that has made continuing normal operations untenable at this time. So we've had to temporarily halt operations at the centre because that is the best solution to the challenges presented by the plague. Removing the inmates and as many staff as possible will expedite the remediation works, and this work includes investigating ways which we will protect the centre from future mouse plagues. And again, this is just learnings. We had issues around, and it was mostly, I've got to say, around the operational side or the management side of the prison, not the actual cells itself. So we had people potentially working in office buildings or buildings where the cavities were full of dead mice and the ceilings were full of dead mice. I'm not sure whether it was the Assistant Commissioner that did you attend up there and had an experience?
I got gravely ill after attending there, and I know others did too. So that was certainly one of the reasons that from a health and safety perspective, it was absolutely critical to look after the health of staff working in those facilities. It was just unacceptable. It wasn't so bad in the inmate areas, but they certainly were suffering as well. So it was a huge decision to close down that facility, but nevertheless, I think it was the right one. I think it's something like about a $50 million insurance claim that we're up with at the moment to rectify that facility. But the good news story is about 38 million of that is being spent in the local community.
So something good has come out of this, but we had to decant 420 inmates. We did that successfully, and with the 200 officers there, we've been able to deploy them, my understanding, around the system. Yeah. So there was no loss of pay, and other entitlements. But again, it's one of those learnings. It wasn't COVID hitting us, and we've had fires, we've had floods, pestilence through the rodents, and of course, sort of COVID. So it's been a bit of a rough year, but I think we've managed it pretty well.
Yes.
All one now needs is frogs and boils.
Yeah. So tell me, so you made the decision to close that facility, but how long had the consequences of the plague been in place? Look, I've had complaints from people that they were ill for a long period of time before you guys acted.
Well, that's true, and there's no doubt that there was some real health and safety issues existing in that facility. We embarked on a bit of a tour around the system to listen to staff in relation to the People Matters survey, and that was one of the facilities myself and other executives visited. And listening to the staff, it was only then that we understood the magnitude of the problem. It certainly wasn't clear to us prior to that, but once a group of executives went there, sat down with staff, and listened to the stories of what was going on in terms of their health risks, we just had to start doing something about it.
Because there was also an issue with mites.
Mites from the dead mouse falling down and mice feces falling down. So there was a whole range of health issues that just needed to be addressed, and it's such a huge thing to just lock down or close a correctional centre. We were just fortunate we'd had this huge building program occurring, so we had the capacity to actually spread those inmates throughout the system.
So where are they all now? Because this is a maximum security facility.
It's maximum security, yeah.
But 400 odd? How many inmates?
I think it was 592, but I could be corrected there. That we had to spread around a system, and they went to a whole range of maximum. But there's also minimum security and also women as well. And I spoke to all those people in custody as well whilst we were there, and tried to get a bit of a handle on how they were experiencing things. And some of the buildings I went into were just horrendous. The smell. You're almost throwing up just going into the places people were living. It's just completely unacceptable to continue on in that facility.
And so where are they all now? And is the idea that once the facility is fixed, they obviously I know the timeline, the sentences will be of different periods, but is the idea that people return? And what's the timeline for that?
Yeah, timeline is probably Yeah, so it was only, 420 inmates that were relocated, just to correct the record there. But I suspect that the works should be finished very early in the new year.
And so, look, I understand there's a mice plague that has affected all of New South Wales, and I think there's probably still issues, but there's another facility that I think is roughly 2 or 3 k's away from this one that wasn't affected. So why was this one affected?
Yeah.
Is it was there a lack of maintenance?
Another good question. That's what I asked too.
Yes.
I'll let you
No, look,
answer.
it is really interesting because I was asking the same question. I'm thinking, hold on, why is this facility, they managed to keep that pretty much mouse free, and the other one was getting overrun. There are a couple of reasons for that, but I think primarily is that, a very different construction. So around that Macquarie facility, they were able to put a whole range of poisons around just on the perimeter to make sure that nothing could get in. So those poisons, and it weren't they were poisons that basically anaesthetised the mouse, and so they'd only go like another half a metre and basically fall asleep and die. But so it was a very humane.
3 k's up the road.
It was very humane. But up the road, what we had was a much older facility, which had a lot
I think
of...
that's why he put it in those terms, fell asleep.
Very humane. But up the road, that facility had a whole range of things called pits that were either stormwater drains or electrical pits. And that's where they were getting in. They were moving, so we could put the stuff around there, but they were chewing through, and we were trying to block these things up, but they were getting in.
Too small for a prisoner to get out, but big enough for mice.
Big enough for mice to get in, and so they were getting into buildings, through these pits, and just invading the buildings. And that's why primarily it was, the gatehouse and some of the staff facilities that were most impacted there.
And the staff are all accommodated in other places?
Yes, they were all accommodated in other places. A lot of them are working from Macquarie. We had just built a new programs building in Macquarie, and we were able to, convert that into staff offices.
Yeah. How long have I left?
I'm not plenty.
No, I've got stuff, but I'm just...
Oh, no, don't.
Oh, man.
I'm ready whenever
So, I've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to have to rush this, which I don't mean to rush but it has been ventilated before. This is in relation to some staffing issues and workers' comp issues. So I know this was well ventilated at the last lot of estimates, but I do want to follow up. I understand, just as a preliminary question, that your insurance, your workers' comp liability insurance is almost double over the course of the last year. So there have been some pretty serious allegations raised. Again, well ventilated at the last estimate, so they're on the record. A number of independent reports and inquiries had to be conducted into how workers' comp claims have been dealt with in corrections. What have you done to improve since
those...
last ventilated?
Yeah.
Yep, Assistant Commissioner.
All right, thanks, Minister. Look, we recognise that this was a significant issue, and I've got to say I regret the way some of those individuals were treated by the agency. With a lack of contact and intervention and management. But DCJ have assisted us hugely from a human resources point of view. They did a review into what was going on in the injury management area, and we've quadrupled the number of staff involved in injury management, which has meant that we can have a caseload of around 40 per injury management worker, and it was probably about triple that or more previously. We put a lot of effort in as Department of Communities and Justice and ourselves into making sure that we have a much better system to manage injured workers.
And I think the Acting Secretary might have something to add here.
Just to add on to what the Acting Commissioner had said, so as he mentioned, the department acknowledges that the best result for injured workers is when we achieve a supportive and effective result. And so we did do an internal review of workers' compensation, and significant changes have been made. We have made changes to the claims process where there's a legal challenge. So we now have more skilled workers who work with the insurer's legal representatives. As the acting commissioner mentioned, we have increased the funded level of staffing from 6 to 24. We now have all injury managers in the department reporting through to a single team, so we ensure that there's appropriate supervision. We've reduced the caseload limits so that we have no more than 40 active, a caseload is no more than 40 active claims. And we also have a new team to deal with complex claims, which is supporting injury managers with the psychosocial claims that need to be done. And we've also released a new department injury management strategy.
Okay, so is it then safe to assume that there will be no further backdating or changing reports while these things are being dealt with, which is what has been found in some of your previous cases in independent inquiries, and also comments from management, you know, of documenting that they will hit people in the hip pocket, is the quote, to pressure them out of their claims. So these things, how are they being dealt with so that this is not going to happen to people in the future? Because people have been very badly treated. It's probably going to damage them and affect them for the rest of their lives. Really bad, no excuse for it. So how can they be confident that this isn't going to happen in the future?
You want to talk about the external review?
So we did take a look as well at, we did do the external review. I think that the previous secretary had had an independent review as a result of the last estimates briefing. And we have taken a look at what was what happened in those circumstances specifically. That has just come to the office of the secretary within the last couple of weeks. And what will happen is that we will be taking the results of that in order to determine what next steps need to happen internally, and also with our relationship with CIRA and with iCare.
And just two quick questions. What, in terms of sexual harassment complaints, how are they being dealt with? There's a report that up to 10% of staff say that they've experienced harassment of that nature in the last 12 months, and it's not really being dealt with in an appropriate way. How do you want to respond to that?
I'll get the Assistant Commissioner. This is the response.
Yeah, look, there's a whole range of things we're looking at, and I think this comes out of that work I was talking about you know, going around and talking to staff about, you know, their workplace, and certainly, you know, that was reinforced to us that bullying and harassment and sexual harassment were rife in some areas, and so what we've done, and again with DCJ's assistance. We've put about $1 million worth of staffing into HR business partners, which will be placed around the regions to train up and develop managers to deal with sexual harassment, bullying and harassment, grievances, and performance management and low-level misconduct. So we really want to push that down the line. We want to get it fixed as quickly as possible. In addition, I've also spoken to my Assistant Commissioner in charge of governance and continuous improvement. I said I want the backlog of complaints and professional standards matters that are outstanding at the moment resolved very quickly. So I've given him a time frame and given him the resources to make that happen as quickly as possible as well.
Ms. Delia, is it true that the workers' compensation premiums for corrective services this financial year is some $52 million? Do you have the figure in front of you?
I'd have to take.
Yep.
Sorry. I will check. I would have to take it on notice off the top of my head.
If you can check there, and if you could provide us with what it was last financial year and the year before, because again, like Ms. Moriarty, I've been informed that there's a near doubling in workers' compensation premiums. And so if we could get that number now, that would be very useful. You indicated that there was an independent review of corrective services handling of workers' compensation cases, Ms. Delia?
Yes.
Does that include the appalling behaviour directed towards Mr. Fitzpatrick and the inexcusable behaviour of QBE as well?
The review.
Just outline the terms of reference.
Yes, I'm just.
If you've got the terms of reference, maybe the best way is just tabling those, if that's possible.
Don't have them to hand. I can have them tabled.
Yep. What do you have about the terms of reference of the review there, Sterling?
I think we're trying to find it now.
I'm looking.
That's okay. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll consciously stop asking you questions, Ms. Delia, and go on a different topic and then come back to that. Minister, the rollout of tablets over the last 2 years in New South Wales prisons has been, I think, broadly accepted as a success to the extent it's rolled out. Can you advise about how many tablets there are and which facilities have them and or don't have them?
Yes, certainly. Can I ask the Deputy Commissioner to respond to that?
Certainly can, yeah. So I'm really happy to say at the moment, and we're not finished yet, that we have rolled out 5,485 of the new tablets. So this didn't include the ones we put in place already for COVID purposes. We had 600 tablets for AVL visits and so on for COVID. So the new tablets, which are the ones to be used in cell, we've rolled out 5,485 of those into our correctional centres. So we've now got them in Dornville Lowers, Dulvinia, Jeffrey Pearce, John Moroney, Lithgow, Manus, Mary Wade, Mid-North Coast, Shortland and South Coast. At the two rapid build centres, we built something different there. We had a plan for that. So they have an in-cell digital device also. So there's another 800 of those devices. They're actually like affixed to the wall of their accommodation unit as opposed to be a handheld device. So another 800 there. In addition to that, every prisoner in the current correctional centre, which is around 1,000 prisoners or slightly more, also has a tablet. So in total, if you add those together, that's about 5,400, 6,200, about 7,000 prisoners have a device that they can use at the moment in the evenings after lock-in hours on which they can communicate with their family and friends and have access to another series of arrangements. And we've now got a process in place. I'm not sure if the Minister wants to talk about that. We're planning to expand this to the remaining centres in the near future.
Yeah, well, Minister, I think we can all agree that allowing prisoners to keep connections with family, and I think, if I recall your comments, being able to talk to kids, see the bedroom, keep that connection, is extremely valuable and important. And indeed, connections with community and family, retaining those connections is one of the best ways of avoiding recidivism. When will we see, well, is there a budget to roll out tablets to the balance of the prison population? If so, what's the budget and what's the deadline?
Deputy Commissioner, I think we've got an additional $42 million. Is that correct?
That's right. So we've got $23 million confirmed in the first tranche of funding. And the rollout is over the next 2 to 3 years. 2 years for the infrastructure work to get the whole thing up and running. It's not just the tablets, that this investment's for a number of other things, including live virtual therapy units, which operate slightly differently. They're constructing private booths in correctional centres for more private consultations with psychologists. In addition to that, that includes money for developing the platform further. So at the moment we have a learning management system, but there are a big investment as well as being made in a very high quality learning management system that will be going out to tender for. And in addition to that, we are including some of the content, like we have been trying to put the MindSpot app, which is something developed by Macquarie University. It's a fabulous behavioural tool for anxiety, depression and trauma. We have to make some adjustments to that to make it really usable for business. So we've got the money for that as well. So it's so indebted to the government for supporting this strategy. We've been working on it for a long time, and when we get this in place, we'll be the envy of the correctional world in Australia. No other agency will have anything like this in play.
Is it intended, therefore, over the next 2 financial years with that budget to have tablet or or tablet-like facilities available to each inmate in New South Wales, and I'm not including, there may be some inmates excluded in forensic facilities or in extremely high security facilities, but each inmate apart from that small handful.
Deputy Commissioner.
The intention is for that to be so.
All right.
That's pretty good.
Well, actually, I commenced this by saying most people had thought it's positive. Minister, will you be looking at the impact on recidivism as a result of these kind of connected services?
Yeah, look, very, very much so. I think the positive, and I'll get the Deputy to unpack some of the additional services we'll be providing, but as I keep saying, you treat someone like a dog, they'll behave like a dog, and if you lock someone in their room or their cell for 18 hours a day with no ability to access, services, speak with their families, or even undertake rehabilitation courses. I mean, this just opens us up to that engagement that we've been missing for such a long time as we continue to reduce the level of recidivism.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And if there's any further detail to be provided on notice, I'm more than happy for that to go on notice rather than right now, Minister. But I'm
always happy to expand on these. I'm excited by this.
Minister, I commenced this line of questioning by saying I thought it was positive, so we're ad idem on that.
That's the second.
Yes, if I might add something there, we do have a very complex document's been prepared by the University of Technology, the Centre for Designing Our Crime. We commissioned that group to develop a program logic and a very detailed evaluation framework. It's a very impressive document, and I think it helped us to get the government across the line because the benefits were very clearly articulated in the document, as was the approach we're going to take to measuring it. One of the great beauties of the tablets themselves is they've got an inbuilt survey tool, which will be very helpful from a number of perspectives, even including asking prisoners about their satisfaction with the quality and the nature of the food, but we can use it for researching people's usage and asking people about their experience. That's already in the tablets now. That we have got a big campaign underway to evaluate those.
I was going to say I'd be interested to see the views on food, but that isn't my question. If that document could be provided on notice, that would be of assistance.
We can provide that.
Yeah. Gluten-free menu.
Where have we socialised that document?
Gluten-free menu.
Well, I'm more than happy for that to be taken on notice, but I might go back to Acting Secretary Delia. Did you have any of those numbers?
So I have the total numbers of workers' compensation claims, not a dollar value, but the numbers, which is a combination of both physical and psychological. So for the 2021, as of 36/21, the total number of claims was 805. In the preceding year, they were 798. 18-19 was 716, and 17-18 was 635 claims. I don't have the specific terms of reference. I can take that on notice. The review, though, was intended to review how the department managed the workers' compensation claims.
And you'll provide the actual quantum of workers' compensation premiums for this financial year and the last on notice?
That I don't have. I would have to take that on notice.
Will the review be made public?
At this point in time, I would have to take that under advisement. There is quite a bit of private information included in the review, and I would have to have someone take a look at that before I can make that a call.
Given the behaviour that was outlined in the reports that were undertaken by CIRA of corrective services handling of workers' compensation claims, and particularly the appalling interaction between claims management officers in corrective services and QBE, has anybody been held to account for that behaviour?
The outcomes are dependent upon and it's only with respect to what's been managed internally. That is the result of the investigation, and we have just had our initial meeting with Human Resources that the investigation had been completed, and the acting commissioner and I will have to work through with HR what the outcomes of that would be.
So are the case managers whose behaviour I think or any fair reading of would say was appalling, have they continued to be working as case managers up to now?
So my understanding is that there were internal staff involved in the scenario, and there were also staff for the insurer. So
Indeed. QBE and
I can
corrective
only
services.
comment on the action that needs to be taken with respect to the department, and that's what the acting commissioner and I will work through.
So what I'm asking you is those staff within corrective services,
No, can I just, so which ones?
the ones within corrective services or who were handling the workers' comp claims,
Claim management officers are not CSNSW staff.
within the department. Thank you, Minister. That's appropriate clarification. Those claims officers within the claims
DCJ.
managers within the department, within DCJ, have they continued in that role up to now?
I don't have the specific individuals' names. I can follow up on that.
I'm not asking you to put the names in response, but I'm asking you to deal in substance with the individuals who were involved in the report, whose conduct has been highly criticised by the regulator. I'm asking you whether or not they have continued in that role up to now. And you can provide that on notice.
I'll take it on notice, yes.
Minister, are you aware of the data on women in prison that shows that at least 70% of the women who are in New South Wales prisons have survived some form of gender violence, quite significant gender violence?
The actual data itself, I am unaware of, but it would not be surprising if that was the case.
Yeah. And in fact, if you wanted to see a part of the population who have themselves been the victims of violence, often gender-based violence, the New South Wales prison population of women would be a subset of some of the most disadvantaged and in many cases victimised people in the community. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Given that, can you tell me what support services are being provided, trauma-informed support services are being provided to women in prison?
Yes, I can. Before I pass to the Deputy Commissioner, so we have, the ones I'm aware of, there is Out of the Dark, which is a program for women who have experienced domestic and family abuse that identifies the options and support that is available for them. We have approved counselling services offered to women who've been victims of crime, including sexual assault and domestic violence. And of course, trauma-informed practice training is part of the primary training package for all new custodial recruits. And we also provide that to existing frontline staff. But Deputy Commissioner?
And sorry, as you're doing this, to the extent you can provide the number of women who have had access to these services, well, the number of women who have been provided with these services, and you'll probably have to take this on notice, as a proportion of the women in prison, how many are getting access to these services?
We might have to take it on notice, but I've got to say the Deputy Commissioner is the founder.
I'm not trying to cut off the Deputy Commissioner.
No, but I'm saying we might be able to give it to you now if we can.
Indeed.
But he's the founder of all knowledge in corrections. Deputy Commissioner?
Thank you, Minister, for bringing them in, Doctor. Yes, so...
It's a contested point, Deputy Commissioner.
The Minister's done an excellent job there covering some of the things we do. I mean, the trauma-informed practice is the starting point, and recognising that women in custody have been exposed to trauma, and I've contributed to develop this literature myself by doing the only large proper study of the experience of sexual violence in women in the state. And they've published a lot of papers about the prevalence. They're quite correct about the prevalence. So trauma-informed practice is the most important component of that, recognising that every interaction that every staff member has needs to have that particular lens with actions. And we engage with a number of organisations to develop our own trauma-informed practice training, which has been rolled out to all the women's centres, perhaps not to all the men's centres, but all the women's centres definitely have had that. So all of our staff in those centres have had the benefit of the training. The Minister mentioned the Victim Services Counselling Service, which also has been running in prisons, and that's been very, very successful. We can get you the numbers from that. But in addition to that, individual psychological sessions of contact, which I haven't got the numbers in front of me. I know it's massive in its scale in terms of the number of individual contacts that psychologists have had. I've just looked at, say, the sessions, and I have to break them down, but there's been about 70,000 sessions in 2021, which gives some indication of the scale of the work. And I can break that down into the numbers that are provided to women, and a lot of that is around mental health related issues. In addition to that, the chaplaincy service provides fundamental support for people as well who are distressed. And we have some group-based interventions, including a program that's based on dialectical behaviour therapy called the Real Understanding Through Self-Help program, or RUSH. And RUSH has been used, I just don't have the numbers in front of me now, but I'll take that on notice. I'll give you the numbers for all of those. So all of those things are designed to support women. You know, one of the things we recognise is that our other programs, whether they be programs around addiction or behaviour change, or even education, can be compromised if women are too traumatised and are still suffering from that and they can't engage. So we take it very, very seriously, and it's a big part of our program at the moment.
Thank you.
Through you, Minister, to Deputy Commissioner, given over a third of the women in prison, I think it's 35% when I had a look at the numbers, 35% of the women in prison are First Nations women. How many of those trauma-informed services being provided to women are being provided by Aboriginal controlled organisations, and bringing that cultural strength and that cultural knowledge to the trauma-informed services?
Deputy Commissioner.
I will have to take that on notice. However, I would observe that we do employ Aboriginal people ourselves. So we have a program, for instance, at Emu Plains for Aboriginal women, particularly focusing on their needs around employment. But that program, because of the barriers that are created by people's trauma experiences, incorporate trauma work into that program. That uses staff who are corrective services staff, and it uses external people. So I can take that on notice, but there are Aboriginal staff delivering that. They're not always external. Our own staff can do that, including Aboriginal staff who corrective services employ.
Minister, is it part of policy in New South Wales to, if you're providing that kind of trauma-informed services, and I note there has been an increase in the services provided and the training, and I'm not trying to minimise that, but to the extent that that trauma-informed services are being provided to Aboriginal women and Aboriginal men, is there a policy in place to have those services provided by Aboriginal controlled organisations?
In their entirety?
Or so far as possible. So far as possible. Is that a policy goal? And if not, why not?
Deputy Commissioner.
I mean, we certainly do have, part of our response is to engage with Aboriginal community organisations to provide services. However, there is some work, and I just can't give you the reference, it was done by the Kirby Institute, that looked at what was specifically about drug and alcohol work, and what they wanted above everything else is for people who had an appropriate sort of cultural competence. So Aboriginality is really important, but people who are culturally competent are also able to contribute to that, and that was the views of the people who were surveyed. I'll have to track down that reference and provide it to you, but I'm happy to do that. So in principle, we like to engage with Aboriginal organisations, we engage Aboriginal people ourselves, and we don't assume that non-Aboriginal people who are culturally competent can't contribute to this as well.
Minister, do you think it may be a useful policy direction to, so far as possible, engage the services and work with Aboriginal controlled, or particularly Aboriginal controlled health organisations, to provide culturally and trauma-informed services to Aboriginal inmates in New South Wales?
It'd be certainly worth looking at. I think from the cluster as a whole, there's been some movement in the area.
There's, I really have to throw over to the Acting Secretary, but a new appointment made by the Attorney General recently in relation to, how we pull together services for Aboriginal people. I should...
Is it Brendan Thomas?
That's Brendan Thomas, yeah.
As you'd be aware, Brendan Thomas will be joining as of Monday as the Deputy Secretary for the Transformation of Aboriginal Service Delivery. So Mr. Thomas's remit will be across all of the services provided by DCJ to ensure that we are able to better work towards the closing the gap targets, as well as ensuring that we have appropriate services for Aboriginal clients.
I have a feeling that the Acting Commissioner spoke sympathetically on a lot of these subjects when we visited Mullowa some time ago, David.
I recall some of that discussion.
Yeah.
My question is how much it's played out in practice.
Well, it's good to start with a sympathetic ear.
Labor?
Better to start with a sympathetic purse.
Thanks. A couple of quick wrap-up questions in the last couple of minutes that we've got. You were given the power under, I can't remember what the legislation is that we passed in terms of COVID, but the power to release prisoners in terms of managing COVID. Have any inmates been released?
Well, that would be an operational issue, but before...
That's the first time today, I think.
That's the first...
Oh, Gallagher line.
Come on, you're cutting into our time. Stop it.
Before I pass to the Assistant Commissioner, can I say, arguably one of the safest places to be in New South Wales during COVID was within the corrective services system.
I think people
and we saw that play out as we managed to keep it out up until the very end, and then even then manage it incredibly well with, I've got to say, unfortunately, only the one individual who was on bail that sadly passed away. But that's a great tribute again to our correctional staff, as well as Justice Health and St Vincent's Health. So,
Minister, I assume when you're saying
it's our
that,
time.
it's only in relation to
Come on,
COVID.
it's our time.
You
Don't
can't
do
be
that.
saying prisons are safe places.
Come on.
So, whilst there were calls from some sectors to release prisoners back into communities that were rife with COVID, we pushed back on that, and I'm pleased to say that we were able to ensure the safety of our prisoners. But certainly, the Assistant Commissioner.
Well, in fact, before you pass to the Assistant Commissioner, the commentary about the option of doing this in August came from Corrections publicly, and so can we just get a direct answer to the question, was anyone released?
No.
Oh, one more question. We touched on the appointment of the Commissioner. What's the timeline for that? And can you just tell me how many people reached how many applicants reached the interview stage?
That would have to be a question for the Acting Secretary. I've got no oversight on that.
So as I mentioned previously, we are currently up to the referee checkpoint. So once that has been finalized, we'll be able to make our recommendation. With respect to the number of candidates that made it through to being able to be interviewed, there were 5. One pulled out at the last moment, so that meant there were 4 interviews that were conducted.
I hope you do a better referee check.
Okay,
than
it's our time, David, please. Our time. Minister, in your government submission to the Federal Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, the inquiry into extremist movements and radicalism in Australia, March 18, 2021, in the submission, there's the claim that the New South Wales government said the program reached almost 1.5 million people. Yeah. What was the basis of that claim?
Can I pass to Pia?
Thank
Pia?
you.
Thank you, Minister. That claim came directly from the evaluation of the New South Wales Countering Violent Extremism Evaluation Program. That is public, that evaluation, so we can certainly provide you with the link for that, Mr.
Thank you. In the submission, you talk about New South Wales counter-terrorism strategy programs to combat bias crimes. What are bias crimes? That's from your submission. Page 3.
Are they like thought crimes?
I'm trying to find out what bias crimes are. Page 3 of the government submission.
Yeah, so that's terminology used by New South Wales Police Force, and
Bias crimes.
I would assume it would refer to crimes that are, or alleged crimes that are committed on the basis of
Racial.
views or attitudes that are held, racial prejudices, prejudice about LGBTQI plus communities, and other forms of prejudice.
Okay. Now back to the evaluation where the claim of almost 1.5 million people. Now I've actually tried to locate that evaluation. So rather than providing me with the link, can you provide to the Secretary the actual evaluation, if that's possible? In the
Yes, of course.
Yes, we will.
Okay, in the submission, it says that in 2015, the New South Wales government announced $47 million for a 4-year countering violent extremism program. And then it says that changes were made to that program this year. What changes were made to that program? And please don't refer me to the submission.
No, we won't refer you to the submission.
Because it's not in the submission.
Yeah, there are a number of changes
That
made.
program,
Here you go.
No,
that
please
program was
answer.
the first New South Wales program funding for CVE.
Yep.
And that finished last financial year, and in the 2021 financial year, the New South Wales government funded a new 4-year program for CVE and increased funding from 47 million to 49.6 million over those 4 years.
Yep.
So as a result of the increased funding, there were changes made to that program, additional measures, for example, an increase in funding for the hate crimes unit from New South Wales Police, an increase in funding for grant programs, the Compact Community Cohesion Grants, an increase in funding for Step Together and specialised case management for people who might be at risk of extremism. So there's some of the changes. It was mostly increase in funding.
Thank you. That's my time.
Hey, Taylor, have you got
Okay,
the
that's
have
it.
you got the Dixes there?
I've got the Dixer.
All right.
Now, we got government questions?
Yeah, look, I'd like to ask Minister if there's anything that's been raised this morning that you'd like to clarify or pick up on.
No.
All good?
All
All
good.
covered?
Very happy.
I thought it was
This is obviously very happy with the questioning he's had today.
Yeah.
Very good.
Very good questioning. Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you,
to everyone.
Everybody,
And thank you for your
indeed.
interest.
And we now will adjourn until...
I know we have one document that I tabled, the Natalie Ward letter.